Chapter 4285. After finishing the business, the illusory Sun sect master personally arranged a residence for Ji Tianqing's family. Originally, he had wanted to show his respect and courtesy to Kenshin, so he had prepared the most luxurious palace for them. However, Ji Tianqing said that the residence that the illusory Sun sect master had arranged for Yun Yao and Ji Wuhan was very good, so he also wanted to live in that residence. The illusory Sun sect master tried to persuade him again, but in the end, he still followed Ji Tianqing's wishes and the matter was decided. Then, the sixth elder followed Ji Tianqing's family to the residence to rest. The illusory Sun sect master calmed his excitement and still had to deal with various affairs. From now on, he considered himself the most loyal subordinate of Kenshin's Firmament Continent branch. This was because he was worried that after Kenshin unified the Firmament Continent and left, he would most likely be the one in charge of the Firmament Continent. Therefore, while he was filled with anticipation and pride, he also felt a sense of responsibility and mission. Even when considering matters, he had to be more cautious and comprehensive, so that he could help Kenshin solve his problems. Therefore, the first thing he did was to take out 4 communication jade slips and send messages to the other 4 forces patriarchs, sect masters, and pavilion masters, explaining the situation. There were too many people involved in today's battle, and the situation was too chaotic and complicated. Even though Commander Ninefold and his 10,000-strong army had been annihilated, not a single person was left alive. However, before the army was destroyed, some soldiers risked their lives to send out messages and spread the news of Kenshin's appearance. He believed that the Celestial King should have received the report by now, and the relevant news would spread within 2 days. In addition, Kenshin had appeared openly in the battle, so he obviously had no intention of hiding his whereabouts or identity. Since that was the case, there was no need to keep it a secret. The illusory Sun sect master directly told the 4 patriarchs, sect masters, and pavilion masters that Lord Kenshin had arrived at the illusory Sun blessed land today and cooperated with the illusory Sun sect to annihilate Commander Nianfeng's troops. Right now, Kenshin has already settled down in the illusory Sun sect. Patriarchs, sect masters, and pavilion masters, please hurry over and don't waste any time. After sending the message, the illusory Sun sect master went to inspect the sect, instructing the elders, deacons, and disciples to carry out various tasks. After all, the battle had just ended, and the battlefield had not been cleaned up yet. It would take time to restore it to its original state. Especially the defensive array of illusory Sun-blessed land, which had to be repaired and reinforced, which would take a lot of time and money. The illusory Sun sect master quickly entered a busy state. He focused on arranging the various tasks and personally supervising and inspecting. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. It couldn't be helped. Kenshin and his family lived in illusory Sun-blessed land. Illusory Sun sect master didn't want any accidents to happen, which would affect Kenshin's perception and judgment of him. 6 hours later, the battlefield was cleaned up and all the spoils were collected. The illusory Sun sect master ordered the elders, deacons, and disciples to continue repairing the battlefield. He was preparing to bring the spoils of war to Lord Kenshin. However, he hadn't walked far when he suddenly thought of a problem. These spoils of war had just been collected and were still in a very messy state. They hadn't been sorted out. If he just handed them over to Lord Kenshin, wouldn't that be wasting Lord Kenshin's time to sort them out one by one? As Lord Kenshin's trusted aide, how could he make such a low-level mistake and cause trouble for Lord Kenshin? The starting point of doing things had to be convenient for Lord Kenshin. Thus, the illusory Sun sect master hurriedly summoned 4 deacons to help him sort out the numerous spoils of war. If it was in the past, he would at most instruct the 4 deacons to handle this matter. He definitely wouldn't do it himself. However, it was different now. He had to set a good example. Although this kind of tedious matter was very tiring and mentally taxing. Half a day later, the illusory Sun sect master and the 4 deacons had successfully sorted out the spoils of war and felt a sense of accomplishment. He put the numerous spoils of war into 3 different spatial rings before going to see Kenshin. In the elegant and unique courtyard, the illusory Sun sect master saw Ji Tianqing at the stone table under the tree and presented the 3 spatial rings to him. These 3 spatial rings contained a total of nearly 8 trillion worth of cultivation resources. There were also many strange treasures and divine artifacts whose value was hard to estimate for the time being, so they weren't included. After the illusory Sun sect master presented the spoils of war, he was able to very fluently and accurately report the amounts of various resources. Ji Tianqing was very satisfied with his ability and accepted the spoils of war. Even though he was already rich and didn't lack any cultivation resources, he still accepted the spoils of war. However, he still accepted these spoils of war and prepared to carefully select them. Then, he would take out a portion of cultivation resources to reward the illusory Sun sect. After all, only the illusory Sun sect had participated in this battle, and the illusory Sun sect had paid a certain price for it. The victory was certainly gratifying. If they could receive his praise and rewards, the disciples of the illusory Sun sect would be even happier, and they would worship and trust him even more. This was the simplest way to win people's hearts. It wasn't worth mentioning at all. In the next few days, the illusory Sun sect was calm and peaceful, and the atmosphere was filled with excitement and longing. The disciples who were heavily injured were already in seclusion to heal their wounds. The disciples who were lightly injured and could still move obeyed the orders of the sect master and the elders and carried out various tasks. In just 3 days, the ruins at the entrance of the blessed land were restored to its original state, and the defensive formation was also repaired. At this time, the news that Kenshin had appeared in the firmament continent and led the illusory Sun sect to annihilate Commander Nan Feng's troops had also spread throughout the firmament continent. In the past few months, the seemingly peaceful firmament continent had actually been paying attention and anticipating when Kenshin would arrive and when he would take action. Now, the news finally broke out and immediately spread throughout the firmament continent. Countless experts and forces knew about it. As the news spread rapidly, more and more regions, empires, and civilians received this shocking news. Everyone knew that Kenshin's appearance in the firmament continent was a signal that he was going to take over the firmament continent. Billions of civilians finally received rain after a long drought. The savior and hope they had been waiting for had finally arrived. They were all very excited and excitedly discussed this matter and spread the news. As for the leaders of the regions, empires, and leaders of the top forces, they all had mixed feelings. Everyone was well aware of how powerful General Ninefold was. Kenshin had just arrived in the firmament continent, and he had already acted so decisively and killed one of the Celestial King's valiant generals. He was extremely aggressive and domineering. This made the nobles and experts worried about what would happen next. At the same time, they began to think and weigh their futures and lives calmly. End of chapter. Chapter 4286. Ji Tianqing stayed in illusory sun-blessed land and waited for the leaders of the other 4 forces to arrive. The news had already spread and was known by countless forces and powerhouses. The attitude and confidence he displayed showed that he was confident that he could defeat Empyrean God King and Firmament Continent. He was exceptionally confident and domineering. Even if his whereabouts were exposed, he was not afraid that the Celestial King would take the opportunity to launch a sneak attack or carry out some other scheme. This also invisibly increased the courage and confidence of the people of the Firmament mainland. This brought a great deal of pressure and worry to the leaders of the nobles and top forces. Although there was no news that the Celestial King had received the news and no one knew how the Celestial King would react. But it didn't take a genius to figure out that the Empyrean God King must have known about this before the news spread. Moreover, with the Celestial King's personality, he would definitely fly into a rage out of humiliation. He would hate the Kenshin to the core, but he would also be worried and fearful. As for what he would do next and how he would react, they could only wait and see. Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang, Chao Qingyu, Bai Feng, Nangong Mihuang and the others were still running around the firmament mainland. They continued to carry out their missions and traveled through different regions to investigate and report to Ji Tianqing. Although they were scattered all over the firmament mainland, they received the news almost on the same day that the Kenshin had annihilated Commander Nanfeng's troops. When they heard the good news, they felt proud and optimistic about the upcoming situation. Originally, they thought that the Kenshin had already revealed their whereabouts. Next, the Kenshin would definitely summon them to illusory sun-blessed land to carry out the subsequent missions and battles. However, to their surprise, the Kenshin did not summon them back. Instead, he sent them a message and asked them to gather in groups of 2s and 3s. If they gathered together, their combat power would undoubtedly be stronger and their safety would be guaranteed. The smarter ones understood that the Kenshin probably had a new mission for them. Sure enough, 3 days later, when they all gathered together and formed 8 teams, Ji Tianqing issued a new order. Not only did they have to investigate the various regions, but they also had to do something more important. That was to sneak into the domain chief's manor. If the domain chief was present, they would capture him and force him to swear a simplified version of the heavenly oath to pledge loyalty to Kenshin. If the domain chief was not present, they would have to find ways to destroy the domain chief's manor and create chaos and conflict. In short, the Kenshin had already publicly announced their whereabouts and declared war on the Celestial King. There was no way they would give the Celestial King a breather and allow him to deal with the situation calmly. Letting his followers go around subduing the area masters who were left behind to guard the area and destroy the areas where there was no power. Although this could not directly harm the Celestial King's power, it could still play a role in restraining him. After Ji Ku and his followers received the order, they quickly took action. Every few days, the 8 small groups of followers would frequently send back news of victory. In various regions of the firmament mainland, area masters who were left behind to guard the area were constantly subdued and forced to swear allegiance to the Kenshin. More news of victory was that the domain chief's manor had been stirred up into a mess by his followers with all kinds of tricks. When the area masters who stayed in Heaven Capital received the news that there was a big problem in their home base, they were all flustered and worried like ants on a hot pan. There was no other way. This was the common problem of every area master. They had to be loyal to the Celestial King and carry out the Celestial King's orders, but they were more concerned about their own territories and cave residences. Hearing the bad news, every day there would be area masters who could not keep their cool and went to ask the Celestial King for instructions. Although those anxious area masters were eventually suppressed by the Celestial King and could only stay in Heaven Capital obediently. However, the Celestial King was distracted and wasted a lot of time. His mood also became more irritable. Those area masters who were forcibly suppressed and forced back did not dare to resist on the surface, but they were resentful in their hearts. In the eyes of some area masters, the Celestial King only cared about the safety of himself and Heaven Capital, and did not care about their territories and foundations at all. What's more, it was inferred that the Celestial King's attitude was to use them as cannon fodder. The discord between the ruler and his subjects was happening, but the Celestial King did not care about it. He gathered many trusted generals and military counselors to discuss and study various countermeasures. He also had to arrange the troops and make various deployments as soon as possible. In short, Empyrean God King and his subordinates felt a great deal of pressure. However, they did not dare to act rashly. The safest way was to strengthen the defense and see what Kenshin's next plan was. Of course, some young and aggressive generals did not agree with the Celestial King's decision and raised objections. They thought that Kenshin had just arrived in the firmament mainland. Although he had killed General Nanfeng and 10,000 troops in the first battle, which had greatly increased his reputation, his foundation was still weak. Currently, he had only subdued the Fantasy Sun sect and did not have any other forces to support him. They suggested to the Celestial King that they must use this opportunity to besiege Kenshin and the Fantasy Sun sect. They must nip the crisis in the bud before Kenshin's forces were formed. Only then would they have a chance of survival. If they waited for Kenshin to subdue the various ancient clans and top forces, and when he had more and more elite soldiers under his command, they would definitely lose. Logically speaking, these young generals' ideas were not wrong. Their suggestions were reasonable and had the conditions to be implemented. How could the Celestial King not understand this logic and had not thought of such a plan? However, the biggest problem with this proposal was that it was too radical and too risky. This was equivalent to the Celestial King using all his forces to fight Kenshin as soon as Kenshin appeared in the firmament mainland. This battle would determine victory and defeat, as well as life and death. Although the Celestial King's side had an absolute advantage and had a high chance of winning. However, their opponent was Kenshin, a guy who was good at creating miracles and was unfathomably powerful. The Celestial King had no confidence that he could kill Kenshin in a decisive battle. If he used all his forces and only eradicated the Fantasy Sun sect, but failed to kill Kenshin, or let Kenshin escape, the consequences would be unimaginable. What if Kenshin did not fight him head-on, but used his super strength to assassinate his generals and experts one by one? Then he could only hide in Heaven Capital, and the entire firmament mainland would fall into chaos and collapse. When the Celestial King told the young generals this reason, they all fell silent. There were still some who did not give up and continued to persuade him that they did not need to go all out. They could send half of their forces to besiege Kenshin and the Fantasy Sun sect, and leave the other half to guard Heaven Capital. This proposal immediately caused many generals to roll their eyes. The Celestial King was so angry that he sneered and said with a dark face, "Even if we use all our forces, we may not be able to kill Kenshin, let alone half of our forces." End of chapter. Chapter 4287. It was obvious that the Celestial King was responsible for the safety of the entire firmament land. He could not take the risk. To be safe, he decided to strengthen the defense of Heaven Capital and wait for Kenshin's next move. Even when he received reports from various sources that the Sword God was recruiting troops and buying horses, gathering subordinates everywhere to build his own forces, he could only ignore it. Because he knew that even if he destroyed all the forces under Kenshin, as long as Kenshin was not killed, everything would be in vain. The only way to defeat Kenshin was to kill Kenshin. When the young generals heard the Celestial King's decision, no matter how unwilling they were, they could only swallow it and bow to show that they would follow the order. Fortunately, the Celestial King was not someone who would swallow his anger. The death of General Ninefold and his 10,000 troops was a big blow to him. It was also a slap to his face by Kenshin, causing his reputation to fall. Even though he did not dare to mobilize his forces to attack the Fantasy Sun sect directly and start a decisive battle with Kenshin, he still decided to fight back. Spies had heard that the leaders, masters, and cabinet masters of the other four forces were rushing to the Fantasy Sun blessed land to meet with Kenshin. Obviously, the four forces, like the Fantasy Sun sect, could not wait to join Kenshin. Since that was the case, how could the Celestial King let them go? He had to take advantage of the fact that the four leaders, masters, and cabinet masters were not around and send a large number of troops to attack the Fantasy Sun blessed land. Therefore, the Celestial King chose 8 powerful heavenly generals on the spot. Each of them led 30 immortal kings and 9,000 elite soldiers to attack the four forces. Among the 8 heavenly generals who were named, 5 of them were the young generals who made the suggestion just now. They were depressed and thought that there was no war to fight and they could only stay in Heaven Capital. Now that they suddenly received the Celestial King's order, they were full of joy and agreed without hesitation. They were very excited and full of expectations. After bowing to the Celestial King and acknowledging his command, they left the Great Council Hall and went to prepare for battle. Since it was a sneak attack, the 8 god generals had split into 4 groups. Naturally, they had to take the divine battleships and rush to the 4 factions. From the moment they left Tiandu, they had to hide their whereabouts and news and quietly rush to their destination. Even if they arrived at their destination, they couldn't directly launch an attack and forcefully break into the cave abodes of the various forces. They also had to use some schemes and tricks according to the actual situation, trying their best to catch all the targets in one fell swoop without anyone noticing. Even though this was a temporary order from the Celestial King, the 8 heavenly generals had yet to come up with a plan. However, it would still take them a few days to reach their destination, which was enough time for them to slowly come up with a plan. A day later, the patriarch of the ancient clan closest to the illusory sun sect arrived at illusory sun-blessed land with 2 elders. The bearded man who had rushed over in a hurry was the clan leader of the Li clan, Li Yuan, a LV9 Divine King Realm expert. The 2 elders who followed him to illusory sun-blessed land were the 2nd elder and the 3rd elder. Their status and strength were not ordinary. Li Yuan brought the 2 elders and rushed to meet Kenshin in such a hurry. It was enough to see his sincerity in pledging his loyalty. When Li Yuan and the 2 elders entered illusory sun-blessed land, they were personally received by the illusory sun sect master. Li Yuan and the illusory sun sect master had known each other for 10,000 years and had a good relationship. The 2 exchanged greetings for a while. Li Yuan didn't even take a sip of tea and directly stated his purpose of coming. He wanted to meet Kenshin as soon as possible. The illusory sun sect master naturally understood his feelings. He also hoped that Li Yuan could represent the Li clan and submit to Kenshin as soon as possible. However, the illusory sun sect master had carefully studied Kenshin's deeds during this period. Especially the process of Kenshin conquering the boundless heaven continent and reincarnation island 2 years ago, he had carefully studied it. With his meticulousness and caution, it wasn't difficult to find a pattern. Whenever Kenshin conquered the leaders of several factions at the same time, he would never meet with one of them alone. Kenshin would always wait until all the factions that he wanted to pledge his loyalty to arrived before meeting them together and carrying out the ceremony of swearing allegiance. From this detail, the illusory sun sect master saw Kenshin's breadth of mind and fairness. He was deeply impressed. At the same time, he also understood that this was one of Kenshin's charms. Perhaps the leaders of many forces would admire and worship the sword god even more because of this. Thus, when Li Yuan mentioned that he wanted to meet Kenshin, the illusory sun sect master immediately became vigilant. He definitely couldn't agree to Li Yuan's request. He immediately brought Li Yuan to meet Kenshin. Kenshin most likely wouldn't meet Li Yuan and would have a bad impression of him. Thus, the illusory sun sect master patiently persuaded Li Yuan to stay in illusory sun-blessed land and wait patiently for a few days. At the very least, it would be fairer for everyone to meet when the other 3 patriarchs, sect masters, and pavilion masters arrived. Otherwise, if Li Yuan met Kenshin first, the other 3 leaders would definitely have a knot in their hearts even if they didn't say anything. They might guess that Li Yuan had negotiated some conditions with Kenshin and asked for some benefits. The illusory sun sect master used a more tactful tone to explain this to Li Yuan. However, Li Yuan was a boorish person who wasn't good at scheming. He didn't listen to the illusory sun sect master's advice and felt it was very strange. He asked illusory sun sect master, "I came all the way here and have already arrived at illusory sun-blessed land. You still want me to stay here and pay a visit to Lord Kenshin in a few days? Lord Kenshin is clearly in your sect. Even if I shout, he'll be alerted. Aren't you wasting time? Besides, we're all the same. We just want to swear allegiance to Lord Kenshin as soon as possible. When did we think about negotiating conditions or asking for benefits? Those people on the boundless heaven continent and reincarnation island who are loyal to Lord Kenshin, have they been treated badly?" Li Yuan's words refuted the illusory sun sect master speechlessly. In the end, the illusory sun sect master couldn't stand Li Yuan's coaxing and pestering. He was also worried that this brainless guy would really run to the sect and shout, disturbing Kenshin. In that case, not only would Li Yuan be unlucky, but he would also be implicated. In desperation, the illusory Sun sect master could only calm Li Yuan down and say that this matter couldn't be reckless. He asked Li Yuan to wait patiently for a while. He would personally ask Kenshin for instructions and see what Kenshin would say. Since it was up to Kenshin to decide whether to meet or not, Li Yuan had nothing to say. He could only nod in agreement and sit in the main hall, drinking tea and waiting. The illusory Sun sect master walked out of the main hall with a wry smile and personally rushed to Kenshin's residence to report the situation. This wasn't his original intention. It was all forced by that boorish Li Yuan. He was already mentally prepared to be reprimanded by Kenshin or punished by Kenshin. Chapter 4288. Illusory Sun Sect, on top of a lonely peak, in a simple and elegant courtyard. Sixth Elder personally came to Kenshin and Madame Kenshin's room. Her expression and eyes were a little nervous, and her posture was cautious. Although she didn't know what Lord Kenshin and Madame were doing in the room without showing up for a few days. But she thought that it definitely had nothing to do with what mortals were thinking. Kenshin and his wife were definitely cultivating. Even if they weren't cultivating, they were most likely discussing the Tao. Now wasn't the time to think about this. Sixth Elder calmed her mind and took a deep breath. Only then did she muster up the courage to shout, "Lord Kenshin, our sect master has something to discuss with you." After shouting, she quietly stood outside the door, anxiously waiting for Kenshin's response. Although the sect master didn't say why he was looking for Kenshin. But after observing the sect master's expression, she also felt that disturbing Kenshin at this time was likely to offend Kenshin and his wife. However, the sect master's orders were hard to disobey. Even if Kenshin angrily scolded her, she could only accept it. 3 short breaths of time, but it felt as long as 6 hours. Finally, Kenshin's voice came from the room. It was calm and gentle, instantly making Sixth Elder's hanging heart fall back into her stomach. "Let him wait in the study." Sixth Elder was full of joy. She hurriedly said yes, then turned and left to report the result to the sect master. Illusory Sun Sect's sect master was secretly relieved when he learned that Kenshin was willing to see him. Although letting Li Yuan meet Kenshin might not necessarily get Kenshin's permission. But for now, it seemed that he had taken the first step to success. Feeling nervous and expectant, Illusory Sun Sect's sect master went to the study to wait. Not long after, Kenshin, dressed in a white robe and wearing a jade crown, entered the study. Illusory Sun Sect's sect master hurriedly stood up and bowed. Kenshin waved his hand, indicating that he didn't need to be so polite, and sat down on the armchair. "You came to see this seat at this time because the leaders of the 4 factions have arrived?" Ji Tianqing didn't waste any time and went straight to the point with his question. The master of the Illusory Sun Sect quivered and hurriedly bowed, saying, "My lord is wise." "That is indeed the case." Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and said, "The closest tribe to this place is the Li clan. Their leader is called Li Yuan, right? If I remember correctly, Li Yuan's personality is rather boorish and straightforward. Did he ask you to find me so that you can see me as soon as possible?" Hearing Ji Tianqing's words, Illusory Sun Sect Master was quite impressed in his heart and hurriedly nodded and said, "Your Excellency, the situation is exactly so. That Li Yuan is impatient and straightforward, but he is not a bad person. Please don't blame him, my lord." Illusory Sun Sect's sect master admired Kenshin's deduction ability, but he couldn't tell what the other party's attitude was, so he defended Li Yuan. This way, even if Kenshin was angry and wanted to reprimand or scold Li Yuan, it should be a little lighter. Unexpectedly, Kenshin didn't frown, show an unhappy expression, and then reprimand him as Illusory Sun Sect's sect master had predicted. Kenshin just raised his eyebrows, thought for a moment, and then nodded. "Okay, bring him to see me." Ji Tianqing's expression was indifferent as he said this in a calm tone. Illusory Sun Sect's sect master was stunned on the spot, a little dumbfounded, thinking that he had misheard. He couldn't believe that not only was Kenshin not angry, but he also agreed to Li Yuan's request. This wasn't right. When Kenshin subdued the boundless heaven continent and reincarnation island, didn't he meet with many leaders at the same time? He knew that the patriarchs, sect masters, and pavilion masters of the other three forces would arrive one after another in the next few days. How could he meet with Li Yuan first? For a moment, Illusory Sun sect master was stunned on the spot and lost his mind. He suddenly found that the rules he discovered from carefully studying Kenshin's deeds and those details seemed to be useless. Kenshin's style of doing things really made people unable to fathom. At this time, Ji Tianqing saw that Illusory Sun sect master was stunned. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "Is there a problem?" Only then did Illusory Sun sect master come back to his senses and hurriedly shook his head and said, "No. Of course there's no problem. This subordinate is just happy for Li Yuan." "Many thanks, Your Excellency." With Ji Tianqing's wisdom, how could he possibly not see through Illusory Sun sect master's abnormality? He immediately guessed Illusory Sun sect master's thoughts. A hint of a smile appeared at the corners of his mouth and he asked, "Do you feel very surprised, very surprised? You originally thought that this seat won't meet Li Yuan today and will definitely wait until the other three patriarchs, sect masters, and pavilion masters all arrive, then meet them together. Just like how this seat subdued the boundless heaven continent and reincarnation island previously. Only this way of doing things appears fair and just." Illusory Sun sect master's thoughts were completely guessed by Ji Tianqing. This made Illusory Sun sect master more and more shocked. At the same time, he was also somewhat ashamed and could only smile embarrassedly. "Your Excellency's wisdom is as deep as the sea and as deep as the sea. This subordinate really admires you." Ji Tianqing's smile was still at the corner of his mouth. He continued to ask, "Do you not understand why this seat changed the previous rules and is willing to meet Li Yuan?" Illusory Sun sect master did have this question, but if Kenshin didn't say it out loud, he wouldn't ask rashly. He would only ponder about it in private. Since Kenshin took the initiative to ask, he certainly couldn't deny it. He smiled and said, "This subordinate is slow-witted. Please enlighten me, Your Excellency." Ji Tianqing put away his smile and said earnestly, "Before I arrived at the firmament continent, this continent was already in a state of panic, and every bush and tree was an enemy. Celestial King had long been mentally prepared. He even gathered all the troops and strictly defended. Therefore, when General Ninefold attacked the Illusory Sun blessed land, this seat directly showed up and didn't hide my tracks. Because even if this seat hid my tracks, it would be useless. As long as the Illusory Sun sect is safe and General Ninefold and his 10,000 troops are killed, the Celestial King will be sure that this seat did it. Not only him, but all the powerhouses and forces in the firmament continent will be able to guess." The Illusory Sun sect master nodded to show that he understood and continued to listen. Ji Tianqing continued to explain, "Since this seat showed up openly, the Celestial King must be very anxious and worried. There are only two choices in front of him. One is to attack the Illusory Sun blessed land with all his strength and try to kill this seat before this seat can gather his forces. The other is to bide his time and continue to strengthen the defense and wait for the final battle. However, the death of General Ninefold and his 10,000 troops is a heavy loss to the Celestial King, and he has lost all his face. With his temperament, he would definitely not swallow this humiliation. He would definitely think of a way to retaliate and turn the tables. Only then would he be able to regain his prestige. If he doesn't dare to attack the Illusory Sun sect and fight with this seat, then guess who he will attack." Hearing this, the Illusory Sun sect master was stunned. Then his body shook and his eyes widened. Li Clan, Fengshuan Clan, Yinguang sect, and Shifeng Pavilion. Celestial King will attack these four forces. Your Excellency is wise. This subordinate understands. Chapter 4289. The master of the illusory sun sect was a smart man. Ji Tianqing gave him a little hint, and he immediately understood the reason. That's why my lord was able to guess Empyrean God King's next move with unparalleled wisdom. You guessed that the four forces were in danger, so you didn't stick to the old rules and didn't waste time. You met Li Yuan today. After the Li tribe swore their loyalty, you asked Li Yuan to leave and return to the Li tribe as soon as possible to prevent the Celestial King's sneak attack. Am I right? The master of the illusory sun sect was not only smart, but also able to infer many things from one case. Ji Tianqing showed a gratified smile and nodded slightly. Yes, your guess is completely correct. But these are all my guesses. Currently, there is no definite news that the Celestial King sent troops to attack the four forces. Also, I have to wait here for the Fengshuan clan, the Yanguang sect, and the Shifeng Pavilion Master, so I can't leave for now. Otherwise, I don't mind personally dealing with the Celestial King's army. The master of the illusory sun sect was a little shocked. It was from the bottom of his heart that he revered and worshipped Kenshin. He bowed deeply and said sincerely, "Thank you for your advice, sir. I've learned a lot." Ji Tianqing leaned on the armchair and looked out of the window with deep eyes. He said indifferently, "Ordinary people think that the final deciding factor of the battle between me and the Celestial King is the number of troops and experts. Or maybe it's my strength and methods. Actually, these aren't wrong, but they're not all right. The battle between me and the Celestial King is actually a competition of shrewdness and scheming. Whoever can predict the other's intentions and plan will have the upper hand. However, my strength and divine abilities are only enough to deter Empyrean God King from taking the risk." The master of the illusory sun sect listened carefully and showed a thoughtful expression. He had a new understanding from Kenshin's words. As far as he knew, Kenshin was incomparably noble, powerful, and lofty. He would never waste words. And today, Kenshin was willing to talk to him alone for so long. This was undoubtedly a sign of his high regard and expectations for him. The master of the illusionary sun sect had a hunch that Kenshin was deliberately cultivating him so that he could take over the power in the future and firmly control the firmament land. This made him inexplicably excited, but at the same time, he also felt a deep sense of pride and pressure. Fortunately, after Ji Tianqing said everything that needed to be said, he didn't make a long speech and had the illusory sun sect master withdraw. The illusory sun sect master left with joy and excitement to pass on the good news to Li Yuan. Ji Tianqing sat in the study, quietly flipping through ancient books. After waiting for about 15 minutes, the voice of the illusory sun sect master came from outside the study. Reporting to Lord Kenshin, the leader of the Li clan, Li Yuan, is here. In fact, from the reception hall to Ji Tianqing's residence, it only took 100 breaths. The illusory sun sect master must have instructed Li Yuan to wait for 15 minutes. Ji Tianqing put down the ancient book in his hand and said in a calm and dignified tone, "Come in, all of you." If he only said, "Come in," the illusory sun sect master would definitely not enter the study and let Li Yuan go in alone to meet Kenshin. But Ji Tianqing said, "Come in," so he naturally led Li Yuan in. Li Yuan entered the study first with a heart full of longing and awe. He didn't dare to look at Kenshin's face and first bowed deeply and said in a respectful tone, "Subordinate Li Yuan greets Lord Kenshin." Well, another loyal subordinate who had long since made up his mind to be loyal to Kenshin. He hadn't even sworn his loyalty yet, but he already considered himself as a subordinate. The illusory sun sect master followed him into the study and silently closed the door. He stood aside and didn't interrupt. Ji Tianqing looked at Li Yuan and smiled. "Li Yuan, this isn't the first time you've met me. Why are you so reserved?" Indeed, when Kenshin roamed the God realm 1,000 years ago, he traveled across the 5 continents, visited many blessed lands and ancient clans, and sparred with countless prodigies. The Li clan was no exception. Ji Tianqing stayed in the Li clan for 10 days and defeated 2 of their geniuses. He had naturally met Li Yuan before and had interacted with him. In fact, back then, the two of them didn't get along very well. The hot-tempered Li Yuan almost personally suppressed Kenshin. Later, it was a few elders who stopped and persuaded Li Yuan to calm things down. It was also because of this that Li Yuan was determined to be loyal to Kenshin. At the same time, when he wanted to meet Kenshin, he was especially nervous and guilty. Now that Ji Tianqing had exposed this layer of relationship, Li Yuan didn't hide it anymore. He raised his head and smiled awkwardly. After seeing Ji Tianqing's appearance clearly, he realized that Kenshin seemed to be younger than before. His appearance and temperament had also changed slightly. Of course, he had heard of the legend of Kenshin coming back from the dead and returning to his peak. He wasn't surprised by this. Seeing Kenshin's smiling face, he couldn't help but scratch his head. He said even more awkwardly, "Lord Kenshin, I am a rash and impulsive man. I almost offended you back then. Please forgive my unintentional actions." Li Yuan's personality was clearly exposed the moment he spoke. Unlike the illusory Sun sect's leader, who was experienced and calm, he was obviously a simple, straightforward, and rough man. Ji Tianqing naturally wouldn't bicker with him. He waved his hand and said with a smile, "Back then, I took the initiative to visit and challenge the Li clan's prodigies. 2 of the Li clan's prodigies were defeated by my sword. The Li clan's face couldn't be maintained. As the clan leader, it's reasonable that you want to stand up for your disciples. Fortunately, the Li clan's elders were more reasonable. I have no enmity with the Li clan, so I stopped you. In short, there's no need to mention what happened back then. I won't take it to heart. If it was someone with complicated thoughts, they might not believe Ji Tianqing's words and would respond carefully. But Li Yuan's mind was simple. He immediately let out a sigh of relief and hurriedly bowed with a smile. Seeing his reaction, Ji Tianqing thought to himself, "This brute is still the same as back then. Although he's a little stupid, he's not annoying." In order not to waste time, Ji Tianqing didn't reminisce with Li Yuan. He directly took out a jade slip and handed it to him. "You know the rules. If there are no problems, let's begin." Seeing the jade slip, Li Yuan's eyes lit up. He chuckled and said, "I traveled hundreds of millions of miles and rushed here in a hurry for this. The sooner I finish the process, the more at ease I can feel." Finished speaking, he began to recite the heavenly oath according to the contents of the jade slip. Half an hour later, the oath of surrender was finished. The oath took effect, and the familiar phenomenon appeared again. Ji Tianqing put away the jade slip and said to the relieved Li Yuan, "If there's nothing else, go back immediately and prepare for battle." Huh? Li Yuan was dumbfounded. Chapter 4290. Li Yuan was a little confused. He never thought that he would swear loyalty to Kenshin as soon as he arrived at illusory sun-blessed land. Before he could express his loyalty and intimacy to Kenshin, Kenshin wanted to drive him away. Wasn't this too fast? What did he do wrong? What did he do wrong? How could he make Kenshin hate him so much that he wanted to drive him away? Li Yuan was stunned. His expression was a little embarrassed, and his eyes revealed anxiety and helplessness. Although the illusory Sun sect master knew the reason, he quickly gave Li Yuan a look to calm down and not to worry about it. Unfortunately, Li Yuan was a reckless person. He couldn't even read the illusory Sun sect master's eyes. He stammered and wanted to plead with Ji Tianqing. Seeing Li Yuan's reaction, Ji Tianqing knew that he misunderstood. He explained, "Now that I'm in illusory sun-blessed land, the news has spread all over the firmament land. The celestial king didn't dare to bring troops to besiege me, so he targeted the 4 forces, hoping to regain his face. At this time, I'm afraid that the elite troops sent by the celestial king are on their way to the Li tribe. Why don't you go back to take charge of the situation? Why are you still here?" Facing a simple-minded person like Li Yuan, Ji Tianqing couldn't be secretive. He didn't want Li Yuan to misunderstand and cause more misunderstandings. He patiently explained a few words, and Li Yuan suddenly understood. He was suddenly full of worry and anxiety. This time, even without the illusory Sun sect master's persuasion, Li Yuan didn't want to stay. He quickly bowed to Ji Tianqing and left. Your Excellency's great foresight is really admirable. I don't want to waste any more time. I'll go back to the Li tribe and resist the Celestial King's dogs with all my strength. Go. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and sent him away. Li Yuan was really swift and decisive. After leaving the study, he quickly found the two elders and took them out of illusory sun-blessed land. As soon as they got out of illusory sun-blessed land, the two elders were still confused and kept asking him what had happened. Li Yuan didn't answer. He first took out a communication jade slip and sent a message to the elders guarding the cave mansion, asking them to immediately close the entrance of the cave mansion to prevent a sneak attack. In addition, he also told the elders that the Celestial King might send elite troops to launch a sneak attack, so all the disciples of the clan should be on high alert. After giving these instructions, Li Yuan explained to the two elders beside him why he had hurried back. When the two elders arrived at illusory sun-blessed land, they didn't even see Kenshin's face before they had to return. Naturally, they were filled with disappointment and regret. However, after hearing Li Yuan's explanation and knowing the reason, they felt relieved. At the same time, they felt more and more admiration for Kenshin's divine foresight. Only Ji Tianqing and the illusory Sun sect master were left in the study. The illusory Sun sect master hesitated for a moment before tentatively asking, "Sir, should this subordinate send a message to the three patriarchs, sect master, and pavilion master and tell them about this matter?" In his opinion, since Kenshin had guessed that the Celestial King would send elite troops to attack the four forces, it was necessary to inform the four patriarchs and sect masters. Li Yuan already knew, but the other three patriarchs, sect master, and pavilion master were still in the dark. The illusory Sun sect master thought that he should inform the three patriarchs, sect master, and pavilion master as soon as possible so that they could take precautions in case the Celestial King succeeded. However, he was also worried that the three of them would immediately turn back after hearing that their base was being attacked. That would be too embarrassing. Therefore, after hesitating and weighing the pros and cons for a while, he asked Ji Tianqing for instructions. Ji Tianqing already had an answer, so he nodded without hesitation and said, "I'll leave this matter to you. Go ahead." The illusory Sun sect master secretly sighed in relief and hurriedly acknowledged the order, bowed, and left the study. He went to send a message to the three patriarchs, sect master, and pavilion master. Ji Tianqing also left the study and returned to the secret room to continue cultivating. During this period of time, he had already refined the quintessence fragments of General Ninefold and the numerous God-King experts in the distorted spacetime of Jiutian 10 Absolutes Tower. His strength was still steadily increasing and had already reached 51 times that of an ordinary peak God-King. Unfortunately, the 5 God Emperors had yet to appear, and it was impossible for them to face him head-on in the short term. Therefore, he was still unable to verify his strength and realm, and how much of a gap there was between him and the 5 God Emperors. Or perhaps, was there still a gap? Yun Yao and Ji Wuhan were naturally not in the house. They had already returned to the distorted spacetime to cultivate in seclusion. In fact, Ji Tianqing was the only one living in the house. This was also the reason why the sixth elder was puzzled as to why the Kenshin couple had not made a move for the past few days. On the other hand, Patriarch Feng Sun, Sect Master Yan Guang, and Pavilion Master Shifang had been rushing with all their might. They were not far from illusory sun-blessed land. They were filled with excitement and anticipation. They only wanted to reach illusory sun-blessed land as soon as possible and pledge their loyalty to Kenshin in person. In order to wait for the arrival of this day, they had endured for a long time and were on tenterhooks for several months. Now that their backer had finally arrived, their days of suffering would also be over. They were about to follow Kenshin to conquer the firmament mainland and usher in glory. However, just as the three experts were filled with fantasies, they suddenly received a message from Illusory Sun Sect Master. When they finished reading the message, they were stunned by the sudden bad news and felt uneasy. Empyrean God King had actually dispatched elite troops to attack their lair. Although they did not receive any information or clues, this was the result of Kenshin's speculation. They believed it without a doubt. As soon as they received the news, the three experts had the urge to turn around and return. They only wanted to go back and set up a defense against the Celestial King's lackeys as soon as possible. However, their rationality kept them calm and dispelled this idea. Not to mention that they had been rushing for several days and were finally about to reach Illusory Sun-blessed land. If they turned back now, they would not accomplish anything and would be wasting time. Most importantly, Kenshin was waiting for them in Illusory Sun-blessed land. If they turned around and left Kenshin in Illusory Sun-blessed land, how could they face Kenshin in the future? With Kenshin's ruthless, overbearing, and iron-blooded nature, they would not be able to get away with it easily. They were already like fire and water with Celestial King. They could not exist under the same sky. If they offended Kenshin again, they would not be able to please either side and could only wait for their deaths. After weighing the pros and cons, the three sect masters, Patriarch, and Pavilion Master made the same decision without any further discussion. That was, to continue to rush to Illusory Sun-blessed land. At the same time, they all sent a message back and ordered their disciples to close the entrance of the cave and guard against any sneak attacks by Celestial King's subordinates. After the protectors and elders of the three forces received the message and immediately began to act, the three patriarchs, sect masters, and pavilion master were slightly relieved and continued their journey. End of chapter. Chapter 4291. After the Illusory Sun Sect Master sent the message to the three leaders, he had been in a state of anxiety. He knew that Lord Kenshin was a broad-minded person, so he wouldn't care too much. In fact, even if the people in charge of the three forces were really confused enough to turn around and return, the God of Swords would probably not be angry. But one thing was for sure, they would leave a bad impression on Kenshin. As a friend of many years, and as a colleague in the future, the Illusory Sun Sect Master didn't want the leaders of the three forces to be confused at this critical moment. Although he was a little selfish, he wasn't selfish. He had a big picture view. He knew that the most important thing now was to expand the forces under Kenshin, and the more forces that pledged their loyalty, the better. As long as Kenshin's forces grew stronger, they would be safer and have a better chance of conquering the entire firmament mainland. So, he sincerely hoped that there wouldn't be any changes in this matter. Fortunately, Feng Sun, Yen Guang, and Shifang Pavilion Master were all clear-headed and made the right choice. They all sent messages back to the Illusory Sun Sect Master, thanking him for the reminder and saying that they would continue to rush to Illusory Sun-blessed land. Also, they asked the Illusory Sun Sect Master to send their greetings to Kenshin and said that they would rush there as soon as possible. It was just some nonsense that didn't seem to be useful. But it was their attitude to show their determination to Kenshin. 4 days passed in a flash. On the morning of the 5th day, Feng Sun entered Illusory Sun-blessed land. As usual, the Illusory Sun Sect Master received him personally and led him to see Ji Tianqing. Now that the situation was critical, everyone knew that Kenshin wouldn't wait for the three leaders to arrive and pledge their loyalty together. Whoever arrived at the Illusory Sun-blessed land first would be brought over by the Illusory Sun Sect Master to swear allegiance to the Sword God. The process was short. From Feng Sun Nia entering Illusory Sun-blessed land to seeing Kenshin, pledging his loyalty, and leaving, it only took half an hour. After the heavenly oath was made, Feng Sun Nia felt relieved. After leaving Illusory Sun-blessed land, he brought the elders with him and rushed back as fast as possible. In the evening, Shifang Pavilion Master also arrived at Illusory Sun-blessed land. Just like Feng Sun Nia, he he was led by the illusory Sun clan master to meet the Kenshin. After swearing his loyalty, he left in a hurry. After a night, on the morning of the 6th day, sect master Yan Guang finally arrived. The previous scene played out again, with the same procedure and speed. Before they came, Feng Sunmi, Shifang Pavilion Master, and Yanguang's sect master had already thought about how to get close to Kenshin and how to show their loyalty and talent. At that time, he was worried that if Kenshin left the illusory sun-blessed land, the Celestial King would most likely send an army to attack. After all, the Celestial King had enough experts and soldiers under his command. He could divide his forces and find an opportunity to attack. However, he worried too much. Kenshin had already considered this possibility and thought of a solution. Indeed, as long as Kenshin left a doppelganger here and showed up at the right time, the Celestial King would misjudge the situation. When the real Kenshin helped the four forces fight against the enemy, the Celestial King would see through Kenshin's scheme. But by then, it would be too late. Moreover, the Celestial King might not have the courage to lead an army to attack Kenshin's doppelganger. My lord, you're so thoughtful and meticulous. I'm impressed. The illusory Sun clan master bowed and said sincerely, but I still have a question. I have to ask my lord to enlighten me. The Li clan, Fengshuan clan, Yanguang sect, and Shifang Pavilion are far away from each other. They are scattered all over the continent. Even if you personally take action, you won't be able to split yourself and save the four forces in time. Ji Tianqing smiled playfully and said, since I can leave a doppelganger here, I can send more doppelganger to save the four forces at the same time. The illusory Sun clan master's body shook, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. In the knowledge of all god kings, the main body and doppelganger could not be too far apart. If they were more than 100 million miles apart, it would be difficult to control the doppelganger, not to mention the doppelganger's combat power. However, Kenshin's words meant that he could control several doppelganger at the same time from a few billion miles away. It was unbelievable. Chapter 4292. The more time he spent with Kenshin, the more the illusory Sun sect master was unable to see through the other party's realm, cultivation, and methods. While he was still in shock, Ji Tianqing ordered, also, there's one more thing I need you to do. As for the secluded and neutral factions and ancient clans, I asked you to compile a list of names and information on them. Have you finished it? The illusory Sun sect master came back to his senses and replied with an awkward expression, reporting to my lord, it's already 90% done. There's still about 10% left, and it'll be done by tomorrow at the latest. Ji Tianqing didn't criticize him and nodded slightly, send the list over after you're done, and then send out invitations to those factions in your own name. Let them understand my intentions and attitude, and do your best to persuade them to join the rebel alliance and participate in this grand undertaking. Whether it's coercion, bribery, or swindling, you can do it to your heart's content. In short, Ji Tianqing wanted the illusory Sun sect master to recruit and persuade more people to join him as soon as possible. However, those coercion and swindling methods were only suitable for the illusory Sun sect master to use. He definitely couldn't use them. It was too degrading. The illusory Sun sect master understood Ji Tianqing's meaning, but he couldn't go along with it. He said with a smile, rest assured, my lord, this subordinate knows what to do. Moreover, the leaders of those clans and factions all revere and worship you. It's just that due to many reasons, they can't contact you for the time being and can't pledge their loyalty to you. As long as this subordinate sends them a message and invites them, there's no need to use coercion or bribery at all. They'll rush to pledge their loyalty to you. The illusory Sun sect master's words were very beautiful, and Ji Tianqing was very pleased. Although the two of them knew that these words were mostly true and that it wasn't that simple to subdue those clans and factions. However, this didn't affect a capable minister who was good at flattery, and said the right words at the right time. Go. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and had the illusory sun sect master withdraw. Then, he used the 10-direction vanishing shadows and created 4 doppelgangers. One of the doppelgangers stayed in the house and meditated in a secret room. His original body and the other 3 doppelgangers quietly left illusory sun paradise and rushed to the 4 factions. Before leaving, Ji Tianqing had a route map in his mind. With Empyrean God King's Jiandu as the center, there would be 4 different routes to send troops to the Li clan, Feng Sun clan, and the other 2 clans. Among the 4 routes, the shortest distance to the 10 Pavilion was the furthest was to the 10 Pavilion. In other words, Empyrean God King's troops would take several days to arrive at the 4 factions. At this time, the 2 troops sent by the Celestial King were still half a day away from arriving. Ji Tianqing's doppelgangers arrived before them. Of course, Li Yuan and Feng Sunmi were still on their way back. They would arrive in about 3 days. On the 4th day, Ji Tianqing's 3rd doppelganger finally arrived at the Yanguang sect. At the same time, the 2 celestial generals in charge of attacking the Yanguang sect arrived with 9,000 troops. The current situation was very delicate. Except for the forces under Ji Tianqing and the experts under the Celestial King, no one knew that a terrible war was about to break out on the seemingly peaceful firmament land. After the 4 troops arrived at their destination, they did not move and silently waited for an opportunity. Ji Tianqing and his 3 doppelgangers were also very patient. They were waiting to see what tricks the other side was up to. The clan leaders, suzerains, and pavilion masters of the 4 forces were still in the dark. They hurried on with anxious hearts. In order to not expose his whereabouts and plan, Ji Tianqing did not tell the clan leaders and suzerains that he and his doppelgangers had arrived. He wanted to strike at the right time and give the 4 troops a heavy blow. Only then could he shock the world. The Celestial King stayed in Heaven Capital and remotely controlled the 4 troops through intelligence and communication. He also monitored the situation in the illusionary sun-blessed land. Up until now, the Celestial King still thought that Kenshin was still in the illusionary sun-blessed land and did not know his plan and conspiracy. Because just yesterday, scouts and spies sent news that Kenshin was still in the illusionary sun-blessed land and was explaining to several young immortal kings. When he heard the news, the Celestial King sneered and sneered. In his opinion, Kenshin was too arrogant and complacent. He wanted to win people's hearts but did not know that a disaster was coming. Chapter 4293. Kenshin, who was guarding illusory sun-blessed land, was naturally Ji Tianqing's avatar. The so-called explanation to the young divine kings was nothing more than a smokescreen set up by Ji Tianqing and illusory sun sect master to show their faces in front of everyone. And within illusory sun sect, there must be spies and insiders sent by the Celestial King. This was something that both Ji Tianqing and illusory sun sect master knew. The reason why illusory sun sect master was not in a hurry to get rid of the spies was because he wanted to wait for the spies to pass the news that Kenshin was still in illusory sun-blessed land to the Celestial King. One day later, he secretly ordered a few elders to start screening and investigating, vowing to find the spies of the Celestial King. At this time, the 4 armies dispatched by Empyrean God King had rested for a day, investigated the situation of the 4 factions, and then began their assault. The first army to attack was ordered to attack the Li tribe's cave dwelling. No one knew what methods they used, or what information they received, but they actually found out that Li Yuan was not in the Li tribe's cave dwelling. Since the Li tribe's leader was not there, it was the best time for them to attack. Even though the Li tribe's cave dwelling was tightly shut, and the defensive formation was strengthened, this army was not afraid. 3 divine warships arranged themselves in a formation and fired their cannons first, blasting out hundreds of dazzling divine power light pillars. Immediately after, 2 divine craftsmen led 30 divine king generals and 9,000 elite divine monarchs to attack without any regard for their own safety. They used all their strength to attack the entrance of the Li tribe's cave dwelling with all their might, vowing to break through the cave dwelling in the shortest time possible. However, the Li tribe elders, deacons, and disciples in the cave dwelling were already prepared. Thousands of disciples gathered at the entrance of the cave dwelling, forming a battle formation and casting spells to increase the power of the defensive formation. Even though the enemy's attack was fierce, the cannon fire was extremely intense. The defensive formation of the Li tribe's cave dwelling was bombarded until it flashed with divine light and overflowed with energy. There were even cracks. But with the support of the Li tribe disciples, the defensive formation did not fall, and the cracks were quickly repaired. The 9,000 troops led by the two divine generals had been attacking for 2 hours, expending a lot of energy and divine power, and their battle power was greatly reduced. But the defensive formation of the Li tribe's cave dwelling was still intact, and the cracks that had appeared were all repaired. Apart from the defensive formation's energy being depleted, nothing else had changed. This result made the two divine blacksmiths and the 9,000 soldiers feel very uncomfortable, and they felt great pressure. Divine King generals, cursing and cursing angrily. Those damned lowly Li clan people, they must have received the news long ago, so they are all hiding in their caves. Our whereabouts are very well hidden. Just based on the Li tribe's intelligence network, it is impossible for them to discover us. Who leaked our whereabouts? Sun SSSSS cave dwellings is. Our whereabouts and plans have been exposed. If we delay for another day or two, I'm afraid that there will be more variables. To see if lords ofs. Originally, they were here to ambush the Li tribe. If the Li tribe had not sensed the danger, the cave dwelling's entrance would still be open, and there would be 100 guards guarding it. These divine king generals, with 9,000 divine monarchs, would be able to easily break into the Li tribe's cave dwelling. But the Li tribe had holed themselves up in the cave dwelling, relying on the defensive formation. This was a headache. The divine king generals went to consult the two divine generals, and everyone discussed a plan. The 9,000 divine monarchs were still attacking, and they did not dare to stop. But at this moment, Ji Tianqing, who had been hiding in the dark, finally made his move. Sword rain. He, who was invisible, quietly entered the formation of the 9,000 troops, and used his trump card. Following his shout, tens of thousands of stars appeared in the sky, and they poured down like a meteor shower. The 9,000 troops that were busy attacking the Li tribe's cave dwelling suddenly felt something was wrong, and they subconsciously looked up at the sky. The 30 divine king generals and the 2 divine generals also looked up at the sky. Everyone then saw clearly that it was not a meteor shower, but 90,000 starry swords. Each starry sword was 10,000 feet long, and they carried a terrifying sword intent that could destroy everything, and they instantly fell on top of their heads. Danger! Dodge! At this moment of life and death, the 2 divine generals shouted, instructing the soldiers to dodge the starry swords. But unfortunately, the 9,000 troops were too weak, and their reaction was not fast enough. Before the starry swords could touch them, they were suppressed by the invisible sword intent and power, and they could not move at all. Even if some people struggled with all their might, they could barely escape a few dozen miles away, but their speed was too slow. In the next moment, under the horrified and despairing expressions of the army of 9,000, 90,000 star swords poured down and drowned an area of 20,000 miles in radius. Boom! 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 There was an earth-shattering explosion. An area of 20,000 miles was turned into an endless sea of starlight, and billions of divine light shards burst out. Countless Sir God experts were smashed into pieces after being hit by the starry swords, and blood and flesh splattered everywhere. Even the lower and middle divine king generals were mercilessly killed by the starry swords. A few of them died on the spot, but most of them were severely injured, and they were howling miserably. Only the two divine generals of the upper divine king realm were able to dodge in time, and they escaped to the edge of the sword light. The two of them tried their best, and they used all their trump cards and divine weapons to block the starry swords. In this way, the two of them blocked most of the starry swords, and they were only hit by a dozen starry swords, and their injuries were not serious. In the blink of an eye, the first round of the 90,000 starry swords ended. 30,000 starry swords collapsed, and they turned into a torrent of starlight that dissipated between heaven and earth. The remaining 60,000 starry swords intertwined into a sword formation of 20,000 miles, and they were desperately killing the enemy in the formation. The 9,000 soldiers suffered heavy casualties, and more than 3,000 of them lost their lives in the first round of attack. The remaining 5,000 soldiers did not even have time to react before they were killed by the starry swords, and they screamed miserably again. 6 out of the 30 divine king realm generals were killed as well. The remaining 24 were either lightly or severely injured. Seeing the heavy casualties of the army, they were filled with grief and anger, and their hearts were filled with anger. It was a pity that they could not even protect themselves, and they did not have the time to help the dying army. As for the two divine craftsmen, they had escaped from the sword formation at the cost of their bodies being covered with wounds. Seeing the soldiers under their command being slaughtered in the sword formation, they were so angry that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets, but there was nothing they could do. Chapter 4294. Swoosh! 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 Tens of thousands of starry giant swords formed a sword array that lasted for 5 breaths of time before it ran out of energy and dissipated. When the stars in the sky dissipated and the battlefield regained its clarity, more than half of the 9,000 soldiers had died. More than 5,000 people died tragically in the sword array. They were smashed into pieces by the starry giant swords and died without a complete corpse. More than 1,000 people were severely injured. They were either covered in blood or had lost their limbs. They could barely fight anymore. Only 2,000 lucky divine lord experts had suffered light injuries. Although they looked to be in a sorry state, they could still continue fighting. As for the 30 king god realm generals, 12 of them were killed by the sword array. 11 of them were severely injured. Only 7 of them were lightly injured. Seeing such a tragic ending, the two immortal generals almost couldn't believe their eyes. They were a little stunned. They really couldn't imagine who could perform such a terrifying divine ability and defeat their army in such a short time, causing them to suffer heavy casualties. Could it be the Li tribe who set up the array in advance? No. The two divine generals were sure that they did not trigger any array. Moreover, the appearance of the 90,000 starry giant swords was strange and sudden. There was no sign at all. After analyzing it, they were sure that it was a superpower and not a divine array. That was the problem. Just how terrifyingly strong was this expert to be able to display such a heaven-defying divine ability? Even a peak divine king could not do it. When this thought flashed through their minds, the two divine generals looked at each other and came up with the same idea at the same time. Their faces were filled with horror. Kenshin. In the current firmament land, perhaps only the sword god had such extraordinary strength and means. Thinking that it was Kenshin who did it, the two divine generals trembled. Fear surged in their hearts. However, they immediately calmed down and eliminated this thought. No, it can't be Kenshin. Kenshin was still in illusory sun paradise yesterday. How could he be here? Since they eliminated the possibility of Kenshin, the two divine generals had new doubts. Besides Kenshin, who else would help the Li tribe and have such superpower? The two divine generals were still deep in thought. The 18 surviving divine kings and 3,000 soldiers retreated to the edge of the ruins. It was impossible to attack the Li tribe's cave abode. With their defeated army, it was impossible to break the Li tribe's defensive array. Moreover, even if they broke the array and entered the Li tribe's cave abode, they might not be able to defeat the thousands of Li tribe disciples. The most important thing was to retreat and recover. However, the heaven-destroying sword formation was only the beginning of the massacre. Just as the three divine generals retreated, a few sword rays of light suddenly in the sky and slashed towards the three divine ships. Of the three divine generals. Swish! 9 dazzling golden swords streaked across the sky like bolts of lightning and instantly struck the three divine warships. Even though the three divine warships had been on guard for a long time and were on high alert. However, they were inanimate objects after all. They needed someone to control them, so it was impossible for them to have the reaction speed of a God King expert. The person operating the divine warship sensed the incoming sword light, but it was too late for him to dodge. Swish! 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 The three godly warships were cut in half at the waist. Countless pieces of metal splashed out and were swept away in all directions by the violent airwaves. Thud! Kaboom! Amidst the deafening noise, the two halves of the divine warships fell from the sky and crashed into the ruins, splashing up yellow dust all over the sky. The three divine ships were destroyed just like that. The dozens of Sir God experts in charge of controlling the divine ships were either dead or injured. The 3,000 soldiers who were retreating were stunned. They stared at this scene with their mouths agape. An indescribable fear rose in their hearts. They had suffered such heavy casualties. Even the divine ship was destroyed. They had lost their means of escape. Yet, they did not even know who had attacked. Panic spread and spread. The 3,000 soldiers could not help but scream and scream. They sped up and fled into the distance. Without a divine ship to ride, they would rather fly. They had to leave this terrifying place as soon as possible. The 3,000 soldiers were in chaos. They fled in all directions in panic. The two divine generals hurriedly shouted and ordered everyone to stop. Unfortunately, only a portion of the soldiers obeyed. They stopped anxiously and waited for the two divine generals' orders. The other half of the soldiers were already panicking and out of their wits. They ignored the two divine generals' orders and fled into the distance with all their might. They dove into the sea of clouds. Don't panic. Immediately get into formation and face the enemy. Stay alert. The enemy is lying in ambush. We cannot panic. Otherwise, if we give the enemy an opportunity, our casualties will increase. The two divine generals ordered the remaining 1,000 soldiers to quickly get into formation. They searched the surroundings cautiously for traces of the attacker. However, they spread out their divine senses and searched a radius of 70,000 miles. They did not find anything out of the ordinary. The two divine generals found the situation increasingly strange. They led the soldiers and retreated into the distance at a moderate pace. However, thousands of golden sword lights lit up in the sky and fell down like a heavy downpour. Swish! 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 More than 9,000 golden sword lights descended and immediately formed a sword formation that covered a radius of 10,000 miles. It enveloped the 1,000 soldiers. The two divine generals and the soldiers were shocked. They thought the golden sword lights would kill them too. But in reality, the sword lights were only used to form a sword formation to seal them. They did not kill them. Swish! Just as everyone was filled with fear and panic, a handsome and valiant figure appeared in the sky above their heads. It was a young man in a white robe. He had an extraordinary demeanor and exuded a domineering aura that looked down on the world. Immediately, everyone's eyes gathered on him. After seeing his appearance clearly, everyone's bodies stiffened, and their expressions became extremely unsightly, revealing dense fear and despair in their eyes. Kenshin. He's Kenshin. Kenshin attacked us. No wonder. This is impossible. Kenshin is clearly an illusory sun-blessed land. How could he appear here? This must be an illusion. Don't be scared. Although the other party was alone, they had more than 1,000 soldiers on their side. But the other party was Kenshin. He was a supreme elite who could block 1,000,000 soldiers with a single sword strike. Therefore, the two divine generals and more than 1,000 soldiers were so scared that their faces turned pale and their hearts were filled with fear. Of course, many divine kings were able to remain calm despite their fear. They hurriedly sent out communication jade slips to inform the celestial king. It seemed that it was a foregone conclusion that they would be killed by Kenshin. However, if they could spread the news that Kenshin had saved the Li tribe, their deaths would be worth it. Chapter 4295. However, many god kings fearlessly sent out transmission jade slips, only to discover that the jade slips could not break the seal, let alone send out a message. The two god generals took out their special transmission jade slips and were about to send out a message. However, several sword lights descended from the sky and accurately destroyed the transmission jade slips in their hands. Fortunately, they dodged quickly, or their arms would have been smashed to pieces by the sword lights. The two god generals immediately understood that Kenshin had been watching them. If they made any strange movements, Kenshin would mercilessly kill them. In their fear, the two god generals did not dare to act rashly. They could only tightly grip their sabers and stare at the Kenshin in the sky. Of course, with their strength, they could not tell whether the Kenshin in the sky was a clone or the actual body. Ji Tianqing's clone did not waste any words with them. He directly used his ultimate skill and launched an attack. Heavenly Dragon Palm. God-slaying sword. His left hand struck out with a dragon-shaped palm shadow, while his right hand waved the divine sword, sending out dozens of dazzling sword lights. Although the 1,000-odd soldiers were on guard, they were sealed in the sword formation and had no room to dodge. They could only use their full strength to defend. Bam! 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 Rumble! The dazzling palm shadows slammed into the crowd with deafening booms. The dazzling golden sword lights slashed into the crowd, causing blood and flesh to splatter everywhere. The 1,000-odd soldiers were slaughtered, suffering heavy casualties. Nearly half of the soldiers were blasted to pieces by the palm shadows and sword lights. Even their godheads collapsed. The other half of the soldiers were lucky enough to block the palm shadows and sword lights. They did not lose their lives on the spot, but they still suffered injuries of varying degrees. Even the two strongest divine generals were disheveled and embarrassed. Before the soldiers could gather and launch a counterattack, Ji Tianqing unleashed another devastating divine ability at the soldiers. This time, the divine ability he unleashed was not only the overwhelming sword lights, but also flames, lightning, and all kinds of pillars of light that blotted out the sky. The two god generals came back to their senses and hurriedly commanded the hundreds of soldiers to work together to defend. Hundreds of god kings and god sovereigns cast their arts with all their might despite their fear. They unleashed dazzling five-colored divine art images. The spells and abilities unleashed by the two sides clashed violently in the air, resulting in a deafening boom. Bam! 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 Boom! Rumble! A series of loud, muffled sounds reverberated between heaven and earth. However, the divine abilities of the hundreds of soldiers were no match for the divine abilities of Ji Tianqing's clone. In the blink of an eye, more than 200 people were blown to smithereens in the dazzling sword light, lightning, and fire, dying on the spot. The soldiers of the two god generals panicked, trying to find a way to escape from the sword formation. While blocking the attacks of Ji Tianqing's clone, they checked the structure of the sword formation, hoping to find a flaw and escape. However, they needed time to find a flaw, and even more time to break the formation. During this long period of time, Ji Tianqing's clone continued to attack, gradually killing the hundreds of soldiers. 15 minutes later, the battle came to an end, and the hundreds of soldiers were killed. Only the two god generals and a few heavily injured god kings were left, struggling to hold on. However, their morale and spirit had collapsed, and their strength was almost exhausted. They knew that they could not hold on for much longer before being killed by Kenshin. Before they died, the two god generals were filled with unwillingness. They shouted at Ji Tianqing's clone, Kenshin. If you're still a supreme, then let us die with a clear understanding. You were in illusory sun-blessed land, so why are you here? Our whereabouts and plans were very secretive, so how did you know we were here? If they could not figure this out, the two god generals would not die in peace. Ji Tianqing's clone did not hide anything, and sneered, "Don't suspect anything, there are no spies or insiders who leaked any information to me. I deduced that he would do this based on Empyrean God King's nature. Not only you, but also the Li tribe. The other three forces will also be attacked. I predicted the enemy's move, so I sent my clone to rescue you. Now, do you understand?" Hearing this, the two god generals were filled with shock and disbelief. After being stunned for a long time, the two of them nodded blankly and smiled bitterly. "I see. The battle between powerhouses is never a battle of strength, but more of a battle of wits. It seems like Celestial King has lost. Huh, so it was not Kenshin who defeated us, but only his clone." The two god generals were in complete despair. One of Kenshin's clones was enough to destroy their 9,000-strong army. It was not hard to imagine that the other three forces would not fare any better. In short, Celestial King's plan was a complete failure. The two god generals understood the cause and effect, and had no more regrets. Ji Tianqing did not waste any more words with them, and attacked again, using all kinds of skills. Boom! 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 With a series of loud explosions, the two god generals and a few god kings were drowned in lightning and sword radiance. Soon, everyone was blasted into smithereens and turned into ashes. 100 breaths later, Ji Tianqing's clone removed the sword formation, picked up the godhead fragments and rings of the god kings, and flew away. This was despite the fact that he had only killed over 7,000 of the 9,000 soldiers in this army. The other 1,000 soldiers had already scattered and fled, and no one knew where they went. But he did not plan to chase after them, and let them escape to pass the news to Celestial King. At the same time, outside the cave abodes of the other three forces, the battle was also ongoing. The second force to be attacked was the Fengshuan clan. Two god generals led the 9,000-strong army to attack the cave abodes of the Fengshuan clan. They originally wanted to use some tricks to sneak into the cave abodes of the Fengshuan clan, and then take the opportunity to cause trouble and sneak attack. But the Fengshuan clan received the news in advance, and closed the entrance of the cave abodes, and gathered all their forces to guard the defensive formation. The army had no choice but to attack the entrance of the cave abodes of the Fengshuan clan, and attack the defensive formation with all their might. Ji Tianqing's clone was not in a hurry to attack. He waited for the army to attack continuously for 4 hours, and when they had exhausted a lot of their energy and relaxed their spirits, then he attacked. The same thing happened again. Ji Tianqing's clone still used the sword rain, and 90,000 starry giant swords bombarded the 9,000-strong army. After a few breaths, the sword rain and strangulation ended, and more than 3,000 of the 9,000-strong army were killed. The remaining 5,000 people were still in shock, and they were filled with panic. At this time, Ji Tianqing's clone appeared again, and used the heaven-destroying sword formation to seal the entire army. Chapter 4296. The battle at the Fengshuan clan side was not over yet. Ji Tianqing's doppelganger was still casting spells to seal and kill the remaining troops. On the other side, the third troop launched an attack on the Yanguang sect. The mental journey and encounters of these troops were highly similar. They wanted to find an opportunity to plot or sneak into the target's cave abode to cause trouble. However, the target had closed the cave abode's entrance and was in a defensive posture, making it impossible for them to attack. They could not come up with a good idea, but they had to carry out the Celestial King's orders. In the end, they could only attack forcefully with the intention of breaking through the cave abode's entrance and killing their way inside. However, each cave abode was the foundation of each clan and sect. After more than 10,000 years of accumulation and reinforcement, its defensive power was very strong. Even if the three troops attacked at all costs, it was impossible to break through quickly. When the three troops were exhausted and had to rest and relax, Ji Tianqing's doppelganger attacked decisively. It was the same formula, the same process, and the same result. First, he used the sword rain technique to kill the three troops with thousands of swords. They were stunned and suffered heavy casualties. Then, Ji Tianqing's doppelganger used the heaven punishment sword formation to trap the remaining troops and kill them one by one. In order to frighten the enemy and create more opportunities to attack, his doppelganger would appear openly. When the three troops saw his doppelganger, they were dumbfounded and completely confused. Everyone knew that Kenshin was in illusory sun paradise. How could he appear here? It must be an illusion. Something must have gone wrong somewhere. The successive shocks made the three troops' emotions and state of mind fluctuate. They were confused for a while and their combat power naturally weakened. Ji Tianqing's three doppelganger could act independently and did not affect each other. Therefore, in just half a day, the three troops attacked the target one after another but were all stopped by his doppelganger. In the end, the three troops were destroyed by Ji Tianqing's doppelganger. Ji Tianqing's doppelganger collected the spoils of war and left quietly. Until now, the patriarchs and sect masters of the three clans and sects were still on their way back. After the battle, the elders and disciples of the three clans and sects were all in a state of confusion. There was clearly an army attacking their cave abode, and it had been going on for 4 to 6 hours. Why did the army stop attacking midway and even retreat? Did the situation change? Or did reinforcements come to their aid and defeat the enemy? Filled with confusion and anxiety, the people of the three families and sects performed their secret techniques to find out what was going on outside the cave. When they saw the situation outside, the elders and deacons who were casting the spell were stunned. For some reason, tens of thousands of miles around the cave dwelling had been reduced to ruins. The violent power and aura left behind by the great battle were still reverberating between heaven and earth. Furthermore, the ground was littered with the wreckage of warships, the fragments of weapons and armors, as well as the corpses of countless enemies. The elders and deacons told everyone what they had seen, but no one believed them. In the end, the people of the three clans and sects gathered their courage and opened the exit of the cave abode. Many elders and deacons personally went to the scene to check. When they confirmed that the enemy troops who had attacked them had indeed been destroyed, everyone was so shocked that they were unable to control themselves. They were also filled with confusion. They couldn't make up their minds and didn't know what to do, so they reported the news to the patriarchs and sect masters. The three patriarchs and sect masters who were rushing back received the message from the elders not long ago. They knew that the cave abode had been attacked by the army sent by the Celestial King, and they were all worried. At this time, they received another message saying that the army had been attacking for 4 to 6 hours and had been inexplicably annihilated. The first reaction of the three patriarchs and sect masters was, "Are you kidding me? There was no other way." There was only a difference of 6 hours, but the contents of the two messages were completely different. It was too absurd. However, after the three patriarchs and sect masters came back to their senses, they calmed down. They believed that the elders and deacons wouldn't dare to deceive them. The news must be true. Then, who helped them resolve the crisis and annihilate the enemy? The answer was obvious. In the firmament land, under the current situation, who had the courage to save them? Who had the strength to annihilate thousands of troops in such a short time? Except for Kenshin, there was no one else. But the problem was that Kenshin was in the illusionary sun paradise. When they left the illusionary sun paradise, Kenshin hadn't left yet. What was going on? Li Yuan, Feng Sunmi, and sect master Yen Guang were a little confused. On the way back, they analyzed for a long time but couldn't find a more reasonable answer. After a long time of hesitation and struggle, they gathered their courage and sent a message to Kenshin, asking if it was Kenshin who had saved them. When Ji Tianqing received the message from the three patriarchs and sect masters, he was outside the entrance of the Shifeng pavilion, staring at the army that hadn't moved. He thought that the other three armies had already attacked the target. How could the army outside the Shifeng pavilion be so calm? However, this army might have received some news and knew what happened to the other three armies. After hiding for a day, they didn't even have the courage to attack the Shifeng pavilion. They hurriedly boarded the battleship and turned around to escape. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing knew that the news of the three armies' annihilation had spread. Of course, he couldn't let this army go. He hurriedly performed the sword rain and summoned 90,000 starry giant swords to kill the three godly battleships and the 9,000 soldiers. The army was lining up to board the battleship. They didn't expect the sword rain to fall from the sky. Their eyes were filled with fear and panic. Everyone shouted, roared, and scattered to escape and hide. But it was useless. The 90,000 starry giant swords fell in the blink of an eye. With a loud rumble, the three godly battleships and the 9,000 soldiers were drowned by the sword light. Even though the generals in the immortal king realm and the masters operating the godly battleships cast spells in time to block the sword light. But the power of the sword rain was too terrifying. In the blink of an eye, the three godly battleships were blasted into smithereens by the sword light. They turned into countless pieces of wreckage and scattered in the ruins. The 9,000 soldiers were also scattered. At least 3,000 people died on the spot and turned into ashes. The 5,000 people who survived also suffered light or heavy injuries. They were filled with fear and panic as they fled without any order. The two god generals were also very fearful and anxious, but they had to calm down. They issued all kinds of orders and commanded the soldiers to work together to resist. At this moment, Ji Tianqing performed the heaven-destroying sword formation again and sealed the surviving army. He appeared in the sky openly and looked down at the army with an indifferent expression. More than 5,000 people looked up at him. After seeing his face clearly, they were completely flustered. Chapter 4297. Not long ago, this army received the news. The other three armies attacked one after another, but Kenshin took the opportunity to ambush them. Other than the army that attacked the Li tribe, where thousands of deserters survived, the other two armies were completely annihilated. When they heard the news, they thought they had misheard and were hallucinating. However, they were certain that this news was sent out by the three armies at the cost of their lives when they were attacked. After the news was reported to the Celestial King, the Celestial King checked it out before sending his messenger guards to relay the news to them. In other words, this news was confirmed by the Celestial King. It could not be fake. Thus, the two divine generals and the soldiers calmed down and thought about it. They guessed the crux of the matter. Kenshin had the ability to foresee the future. He actually predicted the Celestial King's plan. This was already very shocking. And he was able to rush from illusory sun-blessed ground to each cave residence in 3 days. His speed was unparalleled in the world. As for why he appeared outside the 3 cave residences at the same time and destroyed the 3 armies, it must be because he refined an avatar. However, other people could only refine 1 avatar, but he was different. He actually refined 3 avatars. No. It should be 4. If the Kenshin guarding illusory sun-blessed ground was Kenshin's original body, then there must be a 4th avatar. That sword god definitely had a 4th incarnation, and he was probably on his way here. His goal was to destroy them. After understanding this, the two divine generals no longer hesitated. They hurriedly gathered the soldiers to board the ship and prepare to evacuate. However, just as they were about to board the ship, they were met with a devastating attack. While the casualties were heavy, everyone guessed that Kenshin was here. Other than Kenshin, no one else would arrive at this time. They also did not have the strength and courage to rescue Shifeng Pavilion. Even though everyone was mentally prepared, when the sword god really appeared, everyone was still extremely terrified. That was why the soldiers were fleeing with all their might. It was a complete mess. No matter how the two divine generals gave orders, even if they swung their swords to cut down a few panicked deserters, they could not stop the chaos. In the end, it was Kenshin who used the heaven-destroying sword formation to seal off the area within a radius of 10,000 miles. Only then was the chaotic situation resolved. The soldiers who were fleeing blindly were blocked by the sword formation and could not escape. Only then did they obediently return to the formation and follow the orders of the two immortal generals to form a battle formation. At the moment of life and death, it was ironic that the enemy was more powerful than the general. Next, the two sides did not exchange much words and began to fight. More than 5,000 people against one Kenshin. The disparity was too great, and there was no suspense. But in reality, it was the Kenshin that slaughtered these soldiers. No one could hurt Kenshin. Even if hundreds of people worked together to cast their divine abilities and secret arts, they still couldn't touch him. On the other hand, it was Kenshin's divine abilities and sword techniques that could slaughter hundreds of soldiers with each move. The battle only lasted for half an hour before it ended. More than 5,000 soldiers were killed, and only the two divine generals survived to the very end. Before dying, one of the divine generals was covered in wounds and dripping with blood. He looked at Ji Tianqing in despair and said, "Kenshin truly lives up to his name. In terms of strength, tactics, and schemes, even the Celestial King is no match for you. Other than His Majesty the God Emperor, no one in the God realm can contend against you." The other divine general was filled with unwillingness. He stared at Ji Tianqing and asked in a hoarse voice, "How can you refine 4 avatars? How can just one avatar be so powerful?" Ji Tianqing looked at him and calmly replied, "It's not an avatar. The ones that were left in illusory sun-blessed land and destroyed the 3 armies were all my avatars." Hearing this, the divine general was stunned for a moment. His eyes that were filled with despair and darkness immediately lit up. "You mean, you're not an avatar, but Kenshin's true body?" Ji Tianqing nodded slightly in acknowledgement. The divine general threw his head back and laughed loudly. Blood sprayed out from his nose and mouth as he said in a muffled voice, "Ha ha ha, in comparison, we're much stronger than those 6 divine generals. At least we died under the sword of Kenshin's true body. It's more honorable than them." Being killed by Kenshin's true body was probably the last bit of comfort they could find in the midst of despair and death. Swoosh! Swoosh! Ji Tianqing raised his sword and swung it down. Blood splattered everywhere as 2 divine generals were killed, their heads separated from their bodies. He collected the spoils of war scattered among the ruins. He only picked up the space rings and quintessence shards of the 32 divine kings before turning to leave. At this point, the 4 armies had been destroyed by Ji Tianqing. Celestial King's plan had been thwarted. Ji Tianqing then picked up his communication jade slip and sent a message to Li Yuan, Feng Sunmi, Sect Master Yan Guang, and Pavilion Master Shifeng. The contents of the messages were basically the same. It was to inform them that the armies that attacked their abodes had been destroyed. They no longer needed to be anxious and could continue their journey in peace. When they returned to their abodes, they would have to select elite disciples to be on standby at any time. Soon, Ji Tianqing would arrange tasks for them to start conquering the firmament land. In the center of the firmament land, in the mysterious and majestic heaven capital, Celestial King received the news that the fourth army that attacked Pavilion Master Shifeng had also been destroyed. He was furious to the extreme and wanted nothing more than to tear the sword god into 1,000 pieces. In a fit of rage, he smashed a divine jade table and destroyed half of the hull. Many guards and generals were trembling in fear and kept quiet out of fear. All this time, the Empyrean God King had always been high and mighty, always confident in his plans and the pearl of wisdom. It was as if he had no opponents and had never encountered any setbacks or failures. However, since the first day Kenshin set foot on the firmament land, he had suffered one setback after another. His repeated failures made him lose all faith and his image as a powerhouse was completely torn apart. In front of Kenshin, his so-called wisdom, stratagems, and shrewdness seemed so stupid and even ridiculous. He was burning with anger and wanted to gather tens of thousands of troops to fight Kenshin to the death. However, after these failures, he finally understood something. Now, the initiative was in Kenshin's hands. Even if he was determined to fight Kenshin, he was afraid that he would not get what he wanted. The sword god might not fight him head-on, but he would definitely use all kinds of schemes to beat him into a sorry state, making him suffer a crushing defeat and become the laughingstock of the world. With this layer of scruples, no matter how angry Celestial King was, he did not dare to send out troops at will. He forced himself to calm down and think carefully about how to deal with this. If he could not come up with a good plan, then he could only gather all his forces and defend Heaven Capital until the end. They didn't want to make progress, but they also didn't want to get into trouble. They continued to be silent bystanders. A few days later, the relevant news spread across firmament land. The people of almost 100 regions, thousands of empires, and almost 10,000 divine kingdoms heard the news one after another. Everyone was shocked by this, but at the same time, they were very excited. They hoped that Kenshin would come to firmament land and overthrow the Nebula God Emperor's rule and restore freedom to everyone. Now, their dreams and wishes were coming true. After Kenshin came to firmament land, he did not hide for long. Instead, he made a high-profile appearance. Moreover, in just a few days, Kenshin participated in 2 battles in a row and won in a crushing manner. The facts proved that Kenshin was not only stronger than Celestial King, but also much more shrewd and cunning. This allowed all the citizens to see hope and increased their confidence. This matter was spread everywhere among the commoners. When the commoners discussed the related news, they all worshipped the sword god. Even the rulers and nobles of the kingdoms and empires were shocked and in awe of Kenshin's wisdom and cunning. They were not qualified to participate in the battle between Celestial King and Kenshin. They could only guard their own territories and observe the situation quietly. No matter who won in the end, as long as they were not too unlucky, they would still be able to control their own territories. Of course, there was not much difference between being loyal to Celestial King and being loyal to Kenshin. The only difference was that if they were loyal to Celestial King, the people in their territories would be slaves and would not be free. If they were loyal to Kenshin, all the people would regain their freedom and would no longer be oppressed and exploited. For the rulers of the kingdoms and kingdoms, their power would be greatly reduced. Therefore, many rulers and nobles still hoped that Celestial King would win and let them maintain the status quo. A few days were enough for the 4 forces to select 1,000 elite disciples. The clan leaders, faction leaders and pavilion leaders did not receive any orders from Kenshin. They led the 1,000 disciples to practice various battle formations and joint attacks. As for Kenshin's whereabouts and plans, no one knew for the time being. The clan leaders and faction leaders thought that Kenshin would most likely return to Illusory Sun-blessed land after rescuing them. However, Ji Tianqing did not plan to return after leaving a doppelganger in Illusory Sun-blessed land. He did not meet up with his 3 doppelganger either. Instead, he divided into 4 groups and began to wander around the firmament land. Every time he arrived at a region, he would try to sneak into the domain chief's manor and use various tricks to create chaos in the domain chief's manor. When the time was right, he would kill the guards of the domain chief's manor. In the end, he destroyed the entire domain chief's manor by himself. He killed or captured all the guards and drove the rest away. As for the domain chief's manor, he sealed it with a formation. Unless he cast the spell himself or had the token to unlock the seal, no one could enter or leave. He and his 3 doppelganger attacked the various domain chiefs' mansions. Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, Bai Feng and the others also divided into several groups to carry out the same task. A few days later, Ji Tianqing issued another order to the 5 forces. Each force sent out 1,000 elite soldiers to attack the domain chiefs' mansions in each region. After occupying them, they would seal them with a formation. The domain chief had already brought the elite masters to Heaven Capital in the occupied domain chief's mansions. The forces left behind in the domain chief's mansions were not strong. Therefore, the operation of Ji Tianqing and his subordinates was very smooth, and they did not encounter any setbacks. In just 1 month, they had attacked and occupied more than 40 domain chiefs' mansions. As a result, the more than 40 regions were leaderless and panicked. Of course, there were still some domain chief who did not rush to Heaven Capital as ordered. After Ji Tianqing and his soldiers arrived, few of the domain chief's mansions resisted. They all surrendered obediently. Therefore, Ji Tianqing and his subordinates took out the jade slips that they had prepared beforehand and asked the domain chief to swear their surrender. In this way, one region after another fell and broke away from the control of the Celestial King. Book House Reading Website. Chapter 4299. The soldiers of the Rebel Alliance's branch in the Firmament Continent ignored the massive forces gathered in Heaven Capital and focused on conquering all the regions in the Firmament Continent. They divided into more than a dozen groups, constantly attacking and conquering one region after another. The commoners of the various regions cheered and jumped for joy, celebrating and excited. However, the dignitaries and emperors in those regions were uneasy. They were afraid that the Rebel Alliance would destroy them too. Fortunately, the experts of the Rebel Alliance had a clear goal. They wanted to clear out the domain chiefs' mansions in all regions and seal them as soon as possible. They were not interested in any other people or forces other than that. Many people, onlookers, and experts were thinking that the Rebel Alliance's forces were scattered and they were attacking and sealing the domain chiefs' mansions. This was the Rebel Alliance's weakest moment. It was also the best time for the Celestial King to fight back. As long as he decisively sent troops to attack, even if he could not wipe out all the Rebel Alliance, he could at least kill more than half of the Rebel Alliance. Many people thought that the Celestial King could not help but take action. Even many people in the Rebel Alliance, especially the experts of the 5 forces, thought so. They had been worried that the Celestial King would send troops to intercept them or attack their nest. That would be a big problem. However, when they told Ji Tianqing about their thoughts, Ji Tianqing told them with certainty that the Celestial King did not have the courage and determination to do so. Although it sounded unreasonable, everyone chose to believe in Kenshin. They dispelled their worries and continued to carry out the mission. The reason why Ji Tianqing was so certain was because he had figured out Empyrean God King's nature. Before he arrived at the Firmament Continent, the Celestial King and countless experts and forces knew that he would come. At that time, he had already conquered the boundless Heaven Continent and the Reincarnation Island. He was very famous and was invincible among the 5 God Emperors. Even though the Celestial King had a large number of troops in his hands, he still felt uneasy and placed himself in the position of the weak. After Ji Tianqing arrived at the Firmament Land, he first killed General Ninefold and his 10,000 soldiers. Then, he showed up in a high-profile manner. This not only won him the cheers and support of the people, but also put a lot of pressure on the Celestial King. As a result, the Celestial King did not dare to fight with him. He could only avoid him and send troops to attack the Li tribe, the Fengshuan tribe, the Yanguang sect, and the Shifang pavilion. In the end, the Celestial King's plot was predicted by him, and he personally intercepted and killed him. The 36,000 men of the four armies were almost completely wiped out. This was yet another devastating blow to the Celestial King. At this moment, the Celestial King was already irritable and worried about his gains and losses. It was impossible for him to remain calm and rational. As the saying goes, once, twice, and never thrice. Celestial King had lost twice to Kenshin, and it was a complete loss. Whether in terms of strength, means, or shrewdness, he was completely crushed by Kenshin. The firmament land had already spread a rumor that he had become a laughingstock. Celestial King had a strong sense of self-esteem. How could he let Kenshin crush him for the third time? In his opinion, Kenshin was cunning and cunning. Such an obvious flaw must have been deliberately set up by Kenshin to lure him into action so that he could take advantage of the opportunity to deal a heavy blow to him. The easier it seemed to be, the more likely it was to be a trap. For the past month, the Celestial King was determined to defend Heaven Capital. No matter how the rebel alliance attacked the city outside, he was determined not to take action. Even if many of the territorial masters and generals under his command advised him, he ignored them. The territorial masters and generals said that the rebel alliance's forces were all deployed. They were scattered into dozens of routes to attack the territorial masters' mansions. What other conspiracy could Kenshin have? As long as they sent out troops at this time, they could definitely annihilate half of the rebel alliance. Moreover, Kenshin was too busy to rescue them in time. It seemed that the territorial masters and generals' words were very reasonable and won the support of many soldiers. However, Celestial King refuted them with a few words. What you see is only the surface. How do you know that this is not Kenshin's scheme? You are not Kenshin. How can you be sure that he is too busy to rescue them in time? We have already suffered 2 losses and suffered so many casualties. Why haven't you learned your lesson? I am sure that as long as we send out troops, Kenshin will definitely take them all and leave no one alive. There is nothing that Kenshin can't do that you can't think of. The realm masters and generals were rendered speechless. They could only give up on the idea of sending troops to battle. Indeed, on the surface, it seemed that Kenshin only had a few troops under his command. It was impossible for him to set up any more traps and ambushes. However, who could be sure? The Sword God was someone who was good at creating miracles. As Celestial King said, there was nothing that Kenshin couldn't think of. On the other hand, the illusory Sun Sect Master was Ji Tianqing's most trusted subordinate in Firmament Mainland. He had also asked Ji Tianqing why he was so sure. Ji Tianqing smiled and said, Celestial King has been defeated twice in a row. Chapter 4300. After more than a month of contact, the head of the Xuanri sect gained Ji Tianqing's trust and high regard. Even Ji Tianqing's attitude towards him was different from that of the leaders of the other 4 forces. Ji Tianqing didn't explain much to Li Yuan, Feng Sunmi, the head of the Yanguang sect, and the Shifang pavilion master. The 4 experts didn't dare to ask too much and just carried out their tasks according to his orders. Only the head of the Xuanri sect would take the initiative to figure out Ji Tianqing's ideas and plans, and he would find out and fill in the gaps in time, trying to make Ji Tianqing worry as little as possible. It turned out that Ji Tianqing only needed to give a general direction and plan for more than a month. The head of the Xuanri sect would take the initiative to solve many small and side issues without Ji Tianqing's order. It was because of this that Ji Tianqing valued him even more. The reason why he explained so much to him was that he wanted to train him and teach him some ideas. In this way, Ji Tianqing would be more assured when he left the firmament land and handed over the power to the head of the Xuanri sect. Unknowingly, 2 months had passed. With the efforts of various experts of the rebel alliance, they finally conquered 99 territories. Among them, 78 domain lords were ordered to lead troops to Tiandu. Their territory leaders' mansions were emptied and sealed by a formation. The other 21 territory leaders were not ordered to go to Heaven Capital. They stayed in the territory leaders' mansions and were forced to swear allegiance to Kenshin. In this way, the 100 territories of the Firmament Land were temporarily controlled by the Rebel Alliance. Only the Firmament territory where Heaven Capital was located was not invaded by the Rebel Alliance. Next, the Rebel Alliance only needed to conquer the Firmament territory and occupy Heaven Capital. Then they could completely control the Firmament Land. But everyone knew that the real decisive battle was yet to come. The Rebel Alliance had been going smoothly. The most dangerous and difficult part was to attack Heaven Capital. These 2 months were too long for the people of the Firmament Land. They waited anxiously. To the nobles and emperors of the 100 territories, these 2 months were extremely torturous and frightening. As for the domain lords and soldiers in Tiandu, these 2 months could be said to be the most sullen. They knew that the members of the Rebel Alliance had split into more than a dozen groups to invade their homes and the domain chief's manor, but they could do nothing about it. They knew that the people of the Firmament Land would laugh at them and ridicule them, but they could only stay in Heaven Capital and could not take a single step out of it. Who could understand that kind of anger, humiliation, and helplessness? Over the past 2 months, the dozens of domain masters and tens of thousands of soldiers were full of complaints. Their negative and lazy moods were very serious. In the past, they respected and revered the Celestial King because the Celestial King was powerful and wise. Over the past few months, they had seen with their own eyes that the Celestial King's disguise was torn apart, revealing his true colors of brutality, suspicion, and incompetence. The Celestial King's position in the hearts of the soldiers had also plummeted. After putting aside their reverence, the loyalty of the dozens of domain masters and tens of thousands of soldiers to him would also decline. There were even many rumors circulating among the tens of thousands of soldiers in Tiandu. Many people secretly said that the Celestial King was scared by the Kenshin and did not have the courage to fight again, so he chose to hide in Heaven Capital. Some people also said that the Celestial King did not see the overall situation and only cared about his own face, so he had missed the best opportunity to fight back. Of course, the Celestial King was not as incompetent as the soldiers said. It was just that he met the Kenshin and was played in the palm of his hand, so he appeared to be so stupid, suspicious, and timid. In addition, the rumors and slanders that were circulating among the soldiers were also heard by the Celestial King's spies. When the spies and informants reported the rumors to the Celestial King was undoubtedly furious. Without any hesitation or consideration, he directly issued an order to arrest those who spread the rumors and slanders, execute them in public, and kill them without mercy. As soon as the order was issued, more than 500 soldiers were arrested and beheaded in public within 3 days. This caused a sensation and panic in Heaven Capital. Tens of thousands of soldiers were scared into silence and no longer dared to criticize the Celestial King behind his back. But the soldiers only surrendered on the surface, and their disgust, contempt, and disgust for the Celestial King became even more serious. In their view, only a cowardly and incompetent person would be so vicious to the soldiers under his command. In just a few days, some news accidentally leaked by the Rebel Alliance began to spread in the Firmament mainland. According to rumors, a certain clan leader, whose name could not be revealed, had always been careless, without any scheming or shrewdness. 2 months ago, this person had to lead his people on a mission and was ordered to keep his mouth shut by the Kenshin, so he did not dare to reveal any information. However, at the celebration banquet a few days ago, this patriarch got drunk and spoke the truth after drinking, wantonly mocking the Celestial King. He laughed that the Celestial King was as timid as a mouse and had long been scared out of his wits by the Kenshin. The Rebel Alliance formed by the Kenshin only had 5 forces, and they did not have time to expand and absorb more forces. 2 months ago, the 5 forces of the rebel alliance came out in full force, divided into more than a dozen groups, and conquered various regions one by one. That was the perfect time for the Celestial King to counterattack the rebel alliance, as he could easily send out 10 or 20,000 troops and kill half of the people of the rebel alliance. But unexpectedly, the Celestial King was so timid, cowardly, and incompetent that he hid in Heaven Capital and watched the Kenshin conquer the entire firmament mainland. Facing such a powerful and intelligent master like the Kenshin, the Celestial King was so stupid that he paled in comparison. Somehow, this Patriarch Li's drunken mantra spread out through some channels and quickly spread across the firmament land. Hundreds of millions of people laughed and laughed at the Celestial King unscrupulously when they heard the news. They guessed right, the Celestial King was really scared out of his wits. When the nobles, masters, and top forces heard the news, they were first shocked by the strategy and courage of the Kenshin, and then felt sad and ashamed for the Celestial King. Of course, there were also a few masters who doubted the authenticity of this news, wondering if it was fake news deliberately released by the Kenshin. But the news that spread later proved the authenticity of this rumor. It was said that the Patriarch Li was scolded by the Kenshin for a slip of the tongue after he was drunk. He was whipped 100 times by the Thunder God's whip in public and was also punished by not drinking for 100 years. Every 2 days, the rebel alliance would release a declaration of rebellion, calling for the ambitious and top forces of the firmament mainland to join the rebel alliance and overthrow the dark reign of the Nebula God Emperor. From this incident, it could be seen that the Kenshin only had 5 forces under his command. They were seriously short of military strength and could not attack Heaven Capital. Chapter 4301. The Kenshin's punishment of the drunken Li Yuan and the Rebel Alliance's declaration of rebellion were enough to prove that the Celestial King had missed the best opportunity to counterattack. Hundreds of millions of people, nobles, and experts all believed that the Rebel Alliance was indeed lacking in military strength. And the Celestial King's paranoia and timidity were confirmed, and he was ridiculed by the people of the entire continent. For a time, the Celestial King's prestige and reputation fell to the bottom, and he became the biggest laughingstock. Although the Rebel Alliance was lacking in military strength, everyone was full of confidence in the Kenshin. They firmly believed that the Kenshin would definitely be able to break through Tiandu and defeat the Celestial King. At the same time, the Celestial King and the tens of thousands of soldiers in Tiandu also received a series of news. When they learned that Li Yuan had spoken the truth after drinking and was punished by the Kenshin, and that the Rebel Alliance was publicly recruiting capable people, the entire Tiandu was in an uproar. The tens of thousands of soldiers finally confirmed that their previous guesses were correct. The rumors and slanders that had been circulating among the soldiers and the criticism of the Celestial King were all confirmed. That's right. The previous 2 months were when the Rebel Alliance's forces were scattered and at their weakest. It was because the Celestial King was scared out of his wits and was too afraid of the Kenshin that he missed the best opportunity to counterattack. The Celestial King cared too much about his reputation and face, and did not care about the lives of the soldiers, nor did he care about the homes of the dozens of domain masters and tens of thousands of soldiers. The main culprit that caused the current passive situation was the Celestial King. As the saying goes, a stone stirs up 1,000 ripples. The dozens of domain masters and tens of thousands of soldiers counted old and new grudges together, and all kinds of emotions surged in their hearts, and they became very agitated. Those domain masters already had complaints about the Celestial King, and now they hated the Celestial King's muddle-headedness that caused their caves and territories to be occupied by the Rebel Alliance for nothing. Tens of thousands of soldiers also ignored the military order and criticized the Celestial King everywhere, saying that he was muddle-headed and incompetent. Even the ordinary soldiers knew that the previous 2 months were the best time to counterattack, but the Celestial King was stubborn and refused to send a single soldier. If this wasn't incompetence, then what was? Therefore, the tens of thousands of soldiers were agitated, and all their accumulated resentment towards the Celestial King exploded. Although they still had a bottom line, there were no mutinies or defections. However, the mentality of the tens of thousands of soldiers had changed. Their loyalty to the Celestial King had also fallen to the lowest point. Countless soldiers became lazy, passive, and lazy. Those who were supposed to be on sentry duty did not go, and those who were supposed to be patrolling and carrying out missions were lazy and unwilling. Even though the 50,000 soldiers were pieced together by many powers and dozens of domain lords. However, negativity and complaining can be contagious and spread quickly. The Celestial King's trusted generals and spies found that the situation was not good, and promptly reported to the Celestial King. At this time, Empyrean God King had locked himself in his study, venting his anger and humiliation in a fit of rage. Without a doubt, when the corresponding news spread in the firmament mainland, he had become synonymous with incompetence and stupidity, and had become the biggest joke in the world. In the entire firmament mainland, the angriest, the most embarrassed, and the most humiliated person was him. Kenshin did not need to do anything, nor did he need to use any tricks. He only needed to figure out his nature and psychology, and use a mixture of truth and lies to successfully take over 99 domains, and also humiliate him severely. At this time, the Celestial King was so humiliated that he wanted to find a hole to hide in. He locked himself in his study, unwilling to see anyone, including his trusted generals. He madly smashed things, roaring hysterically, and smashing the spacious and luxurious study into a mess, almost turning it into a ruin. After a few hours, he finally calmed down from his mania, and fell into the ruins with a gloomy look. He hesitated for a long time, and then walked into a secret room in the underground palace, and activated a special formation to contact the Nebula God Emperor in the depths of the void. Now, the Celestial King could not find anyone to help him, and could only confide in the Nebula God Emperor, and ask for guidance from the Nebula God Emperor. Although the Nebula God Emperor was far away in the depths of the void, and could not rush back in time, and could not rush back to the firmament mainland. However, the Nebula God Emperor was the Celestial King's last support, and as long as he could get the Nebula God Emperor's comfort, guidance, he would be more confident. No one knew what the Celestial King and the Nebula God Emperor talked about alone in the secret room. His trusted subordinates and generals only saw that 4 hours later, when he appeared in the Great Council Hall, his expression and emotions had returned to normal. Even so, Empyrean God King's calm demeanor still made the generals tremble with fear and dread. Even when the generals reported the news, they lowered their heads in fear, and their voices were much lower. The generals reported two things. Chapter 4302. Hearing the news from his trusted general, Celestial King raised his eyebrows, and a light flashed through his eyes. He was keenly aware of something, and an idea flashed through his mind, but he couldn't grasp it in time. Therefore, he frowned and fell into deep thought. The trusted general saw that he was thinking about a problem, so he tactfully bowed and did not disturb him. He turned around and was about to leave. But Celestial King stopped him and ordered in a dignified tone, "Pass down my order, let divine generals Qi, Lu, and Lu gather 6,000 troops and wait for my orders." The trusted general was stunned for a moment, but he didn't think much and asked, "My lord, are you going to send troops out? But those soldiers are passive and slack, and their morale is low. I'm afraid it will be difficult for them to form an army, and they won't be able to exert much combat power." Celestial King said expressionlessly, "Don't forget what I said before, you have to let those leaders and soldiers understand that this is all Kenshin's plot to drive a wedge between us. Besides, the soldiers have been staying in Heaven Capital for 2 months and can't go in or out, watching the 100 territories being occupied by Kenshin. That's why they have so many complaints. Now that I'm finally going to take action, the soldiers can also go out, how can they be passive and slack off? As long as you give the order, I'm sure many soldiers will eagerly sign up to follow divine generals Qi, Lu, and Lu." Seeing that celestial king was so determined, the trusted general didn't say more and chose to believe him. "My lord, are you sending 3 divine generals with 6,000 troops to intercept and kill the 1,000 disciples of Shifeng Pavilion? Now the forces of Kenshin and the rebel alliance are concentrated in illusory sun-blessed land, but the people of Shifeng Pavilion are in the realm of green heaven. The distance between the 2 places is 5 days, no matter what, Kenshin won't be able to support them in time. It's reasonable to say that this is a good time to kill the disciples of Shifeng Pavilion." The trusted general's tone was calm as he analyzed the situation unhurriedly. After pondering for a moment, he advised, "But we've closed the exit of Heaven Capital for 2 months, and we've decided to defend Heaven Capital. Will there be any problems if we open the exit now? Besides, Kenshin has always been cunning and unpredictable. Don't you want to reconsider?" This trusted general was not only powerful, but also wise and resourceful. He had been Celestial King's military advisor for many years. He was keenly aware that the current situation was a bit strange. Kenshin shouldn't have made such a low-level mistake by separating from Shifeng Pavilion and sending them to the vicinity of Heaven Capital. This was like a hunter dangling a piece of fat meat in front of a tiger to test whether the tiger would dare to pounce and bite it. Chapter 4303. In just half an hour, Divine Generals Qi, Lu, and Lu had selected 6,000 soldiers and arranged them in formation. Divine King Fengyi held the Celestial King's token and read the order in front of everyone, sending 6,000 soldiers to battle. After saluting, the 3 divine generals and the 6,000 soldiers were full of ambition and pride as they valiantly set off. Those divine generals who didn't receive the order and soldiers who weren't selected were disappointed and envious as they watched the army set off. They had been idling in Heaven Capital for so long that they wanted to rush out and fight to vent their frustrations. But unfortunately, this precious opportunity was taken away by the 6,000 soldiers. Divine King Fengyi saw that the soldiers were disappointed and envious, so he comforted them. "Don't worry, everyone. Lord Tianyu has seen through Kenshin's conspiracy and has already arranged a plan. This is just the beginning of our counterattack. There will be more opportunities for you to go out and fight to your heart's content. As long as we have the initiative, we can't let Kenshin attack Heaven Capital. Instead, we will destroy his soldiers." Divine King Fengyi's words allowed the thousands of soldiers to see hope. They rallied their morale and regained their morale. Divine Generals Qi, Lu, and Lu led the 6,000 soldiers and arrived at the exit of Heaven Capital with high morale. The entrance and exit that had been sealed off before was now opened by the guards who were guarding this place. Swoosh! When the 6,000 soldiers arrived, the exit of the defensive formation was opened and a magnificent light gate that was hundreds of meters high appeared in the sky. In order to show the majesty and dominance of Heaven Capital, even the space gate at the exit of the formation was set up so huge. The 6,000 soldiers lined up in formation and stepped through the huge light gate one by one, leaving Heaven Capital. Outside Tiandu, in the vast and boundless sky, the 3 divine generals took out their divine ships and allowed the 6,000 soldiers to board one after another. Although it was only half a day's journey from Heaven Capital to Firmament Domain Chief's mansion, they couldn't let the 6,000 soldiers fly. Not only would it be too slow, but it would also consume a lot of the soldiers' strength. After a quarter of an hour, the 6,000 soldiers all boarded the divine ship and set off for Firmament Domain Chief's mansion. Throughout the entire process, nearly 1,000 guards at the entrance of Tiandu stared at the soldiers with eyes full of envy. Although the commanders of the guards were all inferior and middle divine kings, they were relaxed. However, everyone was relaxed and focused their attention on the 6,000 soldiers. No one could detect that there was an invisible figure who had concealed his aura. Needless to say, the people of the Shifeng Pavilion were still on their way to the main mansion of the Firmament Domain. And the people of the Illusory Sun sect, the Li tribe, the Fengshuan tribe, and the Yanguang sect had been staying in the deity slayer battleship. They did not know what was going on outside, nor did they know where Ji Tianqing would take them. Anyway, they were resting in the battleship and waiting for Ji Tianqing's orders at any time. The 6,000 soldiers left on the 3 deity battleships, and the defense formation of Heaven Capital was closed. At this time, Ji Tianqing had already wandered around Heaven Capital and began to investigate the military situation. He didn't tell his soldiers that he had a seemingly crazy plan to defeat Empyrean Deity King and conquer the firmament continent. He wanted to create a miracle. Using only 5,000 elite disciples of the 5 forces to conquer Heaven Capital and defeat 50,000 soldiers. This plan was not only crazy, but also absurd. Anyone who heard it would feel it was incredible and unbelievable. Therefore, Ji Tianqing did not tell anyone in advance, but took action directly. Of course, in order to accomplish such a heaven-defying miracle and feat, it was not something that could be achieved by risking his life. After he sneaked into Heaven Capital, he planned to understand the situation first, and then make a detailed plan. The main purpose was to sow discord and destroy. First, he would make Heaven Capital chaotic, and it would be best to make tens of thousands of soldiers mutiny. When Heaven Capital was in chaos, and the 50,000 soldiers lost their fighting capacity, his goal would be achieved, and the miracle would come true. But this required time, patience, and more importantly, strategy and means. The 3 immortal generals Qi, Lu, and Lu led the 6,000 soldiers and rushed to the main mansion of the Firmament Domain on the deity battleship. The Firmament Domain was the most important domain among the 100 regions in the Firmament continent. The master of the domain had a very high status. Not only did he often come in and out of Heaven Capital, but he was also the favorite of the Celestial King. He was also deeply trusted and valued by the Nebula God Emperor. Therefore, when the Celestial King issued the summons 2 months ago, dozens of domain masters entered Heaven Capital, including the master of the Firmament Domain. Chapter 4304. When the Lord of Firmament Domain was ordered to go to Heaven Capital, he took away 70% of the Domain Chief's mansion's forces, which made the defense of the Domain Chief's mansion weak. However, the defense array of the Domain Chief's mansion was closed and no one was allowed to enter or leave. The remaining 2,000 guards and 3,000 servants only needed to stay in the Domain Chief's mansion. In the opinion of the Lord of Firmament Domain, if even his Domain Chief's mansion was attacked, the entire Firmament land would have fallen. In that case, even if his Domain Chief's mansion was occupied, it would not be a big deal. Moreover, the Celestial King would definitely send a large number of troops to wipe out the Kenshin forces. He would never allow that to happen. This was his idea 2 months ago. Who knew that it would come true? Although the 2,000 guards and 3,000 servants who stayed in the Domain Chief's mansion could not enter or leave the Domain Chief's mansion, they could still communicate with the outside world. They had already known that the disciples of Shifang Pavilion of the Rebel Alliance were coming to attack the Domain Chief's mansion. Even though there were only 1,000 disciples in Shifang Pavilion, they were led by the Pavilion Master, Deputy Pavilion Master, Elders, Deacons, and other God King experts. The 2,000 guards who stayed in the Domain Chief's mansion were almost all in the Sir God realm. Only a few of them were in the God King realm. The most powerful one among them was just a middle God King in the 5th degree realm. Knowing that Shifang Pavilion was coming to attack the Domain Chief's mansion, the guards and servants who stayed in the Domain Chief's mansion were all anxious and worried. They had no choice but to ask for help from the master of the Firmament Domain. However, the Domain Chief was ordered to stay in Heaven Capital and could not come out. Naturally, he could not save them. However, the leader of the Firmament territory told the guards a piece of great news. That was: stay calm and don't panic. There were already 3 divine generals leading 6,000 troops on their way to support the Domain Chief's mansion. Upon hearing this news, the guards who had been full of worries and sleepless nights heaved a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Everyone was relieved. They cheered up and stared at the entrance of the domain chief's mansion, ready to fight at any time. Anyway, under the protection of the defense array, they only needed to keep the array running and replenish its power. Even if they could only hold on for one day, the 6,000 reinforcements would arrive in half a day. Therefore, they didn't have to worry about their safety. Time passed quietly, 1 hour after another. Half a day was about to pass, but there was still no movement at the entrance of the domain chief's manor. What about the 1,000 disciples of Shifeng Pavilion? Weren't they going to attack the Firmament Domain Chief's mansion? Why hasn't there been any movement yet? Calculating the time, they should have arrived long ago. Before this, the guards were afraid that the Shifeng Pavilion would invade. Now that reinforcements were coming, they were full of confidence, but they were afraid that the people of Shifeng Pavilion would not come. Another 2 hours passed. There was still no movement at the entrance of the domain chief's mansion. The disciples of the Shifeng Pavilion still hadn't shown up. More than 2,000 guards were in formation. After waiting for so long, they were a little impatient. However, they didn't dare to activate the grand formation and go outside to check the situation. They could only blindly guess and deduce. Just like that, before the disciples of 10 Directions Pavilion arrived, reinforcements arrived. 3 divine warships sped over from afar with dazzling lights. They arrived at the entrance of the domain chief's manor. After the divine warship came to a stop, the 6,000 soldiers flew out from the divine warship and quickly got into formation in the sky. Then, under everyone's gaze, 3 immortal generals and 30 commanders and deputy generals in the King God realm showed up. It was reasonable to say that it didn't take 6,000 soldiers to kill the 1,000 disciples of Shifeng Pavilion, let alone 30 King God realm experts. But Empyrean God King had sufficient military strength and numerous experts under his command. The 3 immortal generals, Qi, Lu, and Lu, wanted to win this battle easily, so they brought so many King God realm experts with them. However, when they saw that the entrance of the Firmament Domain Chief's mansion was calm and there was no trace of fighting, they were a little confused. They had the same idea as the guards in the Domain Chief's mansion. The people of Shifeng Pavilion should have arrived long ago. Why were they nowhere to be seen? The 3 immortal generals realized that something was wrong. They all frowned and hurried to discuss countermeasures through sound transmission. Soon, the 3 immortal generals came up with an idea. One of the immortal generals stayed at the entrance with 2,000 soldiers. They were responsible for monitoring the situation at the entrance and contacting the guards in the domain chief's mansion. The other 2 immortal generals led 2,000 soldiers in 2 directions to search the area within a radius of 200,000 miles. The 3 immortal generals agreed that the people of Shifeng Pavilion had arrived long ago. However, they didn't launch an attack immediately out of caution. In this case, the people of Shifeng Pavilion must be hiding nearby to observe the situation and then find the right time to attack. In this case, they had to find out the people of Shifeng Pavilion and kill them all with their absolute advantage in numbers. Soon, the 6,000 soldiers divided into 3 directions to carry out their respective tasks. 2 immortal generals led the 4,000 soldiers to the east and west respectively. Immortal General Lu led 2,000 soldiers to stay where they were. He was vigilant and alert while trying to contact the guards in the domain chief's mansion. Fortunately, Immortal General Lu was careful enough. Before he set out, he had asked the domain lord for a token that allowed him to enter the domain lord's mansion and several jade slips that could be used to contact the guard commander. He sent out a message jade slip to contact the commander of the guards in the domain chief's mansion. He told him his identity and the purpose of his visit. The commander of the guards was very cautious. After some twists and turns, he confirmed Immortal General Lu's identity. Then, he opened the entrance of the domain chief's mansion and welcomed Immortal General Lu in. As soon as he entered the domain chief's mansion, Immortal General Lu didn't want to waste time. He waved his hand to interrupt the greetings of the guards and asked directly, "Is there any news about the disciples of Shifeng Pavilion? Did they launch an attack before we arrived?" The commander of the guards knew the seriousness of the matter. He didn't dare to neglect and answered honestly, "Immortal General, we have been guarding in the domain chief's mansion. We haven't been attacked or received any news about the disciples of Shifeng Pavilion." Immortal General Lu's face became gloomier. He murmured to himself, as expected, "They haven't shown up or attacked. Next, we'll have to wait for the results of the other two Immortal Generals' investigation. If they can find the disciples of Shifeng Pavilion nearby, it'll be fine. If they can't, I'm afraid it'll be troublesome." The commander of the guards didn't understand the meaning of Immortal General Lu's words. When he was about to ask, Immortal General Lu turned to leave and said, "Continue to guard the entrance and exit of the domain chief's mansion. Don't make any mistakes." The commander of the guards didn't dare to say more. He could only do as he was told. Immortal General Lu left the domain chief's mansion and waited patiently in the sky. After a quarter of an hour, Immortal General Qi and Immortal General Lu returned with the army. After talking with each other, they found out that they had searched more than 200,000 miles around but didn't find any trace of the disciples of Shifeng Pavilion. This result made Immortal General Lu's face more serious. He couldn't help but whisper, "It's over. Something big is going to happen." Chapter 4305. None of the 4 battle marshals and 20 divine generals under Empyrean God King's command were mediocre. They were all outstanding talents. However, the firmament continent had been too peaceful before, so many immortal generals didn't have a chance to show their talents. For example, Immortal General Lu was a powerful and meticulous general. Seeing his reaction, Immortal Generals Qi and Lu were both stunned. They asked, "Lu, it's just the Shifeng Pavilion that didn't come. What could happen?" "Lu, we all know you're very meticulous. Can you tell us what's going on?" Divine General Lu didn't hide anything. He frowned and said, "In truth, before we set out, I already felt that this matter was rather strange. Although Kenshin is arrogant and overbearing, he is not stupid. He wouldn't be so arrogant as to make such a stupid mistake. He and the disciples of the 4 forces stayed in the illusionary sun-blessed land and let the Shifeng Pavilion attack the most dangerous firmament domain chief mansion alone. Do you think it's possible?" Immortal General Qi thought for a while and shook his head. "Yes, I think it's weird too." Immortal General Lu was still confused. He asked, "But didn't our scouts and informants figure it out?" The disciples of the Shifeng Pavilion did come to the firmament domain chief mansion. Immortal General Lu waved his hand and said, "They did come to the domain chief mansion, but it doesn't mean they are going to attack it. Don't forget, the last message we received was yesterday evening. At that time, the disciples of the Shifeng Pavilion were still 20 million miles away." The 2 immortal generals were stunned when they heard this. They also felt that there was a big problem. Divine General Lu asked in confusion, "Then tell me, what's going to happen?" Immortal General Lu thought for a while and lowered his voice. He said seriously, "I think it must be Kenshin's conspiracy. The disciples of the Shifeng Pavilion didn't come to attack the firmament domain chief mansion. They were just a cover. Besides, I suspect they didn't come to the domain chief mansion and hid somewhere else. We have to report this news to the Celestial King as soon as possible. We can't let our guard down, or something big will happen." Divine Generals Qi and Lu were still a little confused, their faces full of doubt. "Old Lu, we trust your intuition. We also feel that this matter is a little strange. It might be a scheme by the Kenshin. However, we still don't understand why Kenshin would design such a scheme. Using 1,000 disciples of Shifeng Pavilion to disperse our forces, so that he could lead the other 4 forces to attack Chengdu. This doesn't seem possible, right? Yes. There are only 1,000 disciples in Shifeng Pavilion. We can easily annihilate them with 3 to 5,000 people. Even if our 6,000 troops left Tiandu still has more than 40,000 troops. Even if he opens the door and allows Kenshin to lead the disciples of the other 4 forces to attack, he is still seeking his own death. Although Divine General Lu's analysis and conjecture made Qi and Lu believe that this was the Kenshin scheme, Qi and Lu believed that it was the Kenshin scheme. However, the two of them couldn't figure out the purpose of Kenshin's scheme. Faced with the two Divine Generals' doubts, Divine General Lu couldn't explain clearly. He could only say in a low voice, "How can we guess what Kenshin wants to do? Anyway, I trust my intuition. This is definitely the Kenshin scheme. We must report this to the Celestial King." Divine Generals Qi and Lu also knew the seriousness of the matter. They would rather report it incorrectly than hide it. Even if they couldn't guess what Kenshin's scheme was, they believed that Divine King Fengyi and the Celestial King would know how to deal with it. Therefore, the 3 Divine Generals jointly sent a message jade slip to Divine King Fengyi. Then, Divine King Fengyi reminded the Celestial King. After reporting the situation to their superiors, the 3 Divine Generals didn't dare to leave without permission. They could only stay at the entrance of the realm of firmament and wait for the Celestial King's orders. About an hour later, Divine King Fengyi sent a message back, conveying the Celestial King's decree. The decree was formal and difficult to understand. However, the general meaning was clear. It was, to order the 3 Divine Generals to stay outside the realm of firmament and continue to be vigilant and search for the disciples of Shifeng Pavilion. The Celestial King already knew what they reported and would find a way to deal with it. In the future, if they could prove that their warnings were effective, the Celestial King would reward them according to their merits. After receiving this reply, the 3 Divine Generals were relieved. They still acted separately, lurking at the entrance of the realm of firmament and continuing to search and wait for the disciples of Shifeng Pavilion. In fact, Divine King Fengyi didn't need the 3 Divine Generals to remind him. When he learned that the disciples of Shifeng Pavilion didn't appear and didn't attack the realm of firmament, he realized that something was wrong. With his intelligence, he naturally guessed that this might be Kenshin's scheme. However, like the 3 Divine Generals, he couldn't figure out what Kenshin wanted to do no matter how hard he tried to analyze and figure it out. Therefore, he reported the news to the Celestial King and asked the Celestial King to make the decision. Unfortunately, the Celestial King couldn't figure out the reason or figure out Kenshin's plan and goal after pondering for a long time. In short, he and more than 40,000 soldiers guarded Heaven Capital and closed the entrance. Who didn't know what they were planning? Do you think we're fools? I've already tolerated you so many times, but this time, I definitely won't. Go and tell the people of the pleasure domain to scram and not appear before the appointed time. Ah! The messenger guard did not expect the deputy region master to be so angry and say such tough words. Of course, he was a little confused. He hesitated and asked tentatively, "Sir, do I really have to answer them like that?" Ji Tianqing glared at him and scolded, "You coward, are you afraid of them?" The messenger guard shrank back in fright. He didn't dare to speak any more nonsense. He hurriedly bowed and said, "This subordinate understands. Sir, please rest assured that this subordinate will convey your message truthfully." After that, the messenger guard ran away like a wisp of smoke. Ji Tianqing got up and went to the study. He asked the maidservant to make a pot of tea. Then, he leisurely reclined in the armchair and waited for the follow-up. He had already spread out his divine sense to observe the situation around him. He stared at his subordinates and the people of the Joy Realm. He could clearly tell that when the messenger guard relayed his words to the people of the Happy Realm, the expressions on their faces had been marvelous. What happened next was also within his expectations. The vice domain master of Joy Realm and his many guards were naturally enraged by the humiliation and started a conflict with the soldiers under his command. Both sides cursed and ridiculed each other. No one was willing to back down, so shoving and fighting broke out. Although no one was killed, dozens of people from both sides were injured. Most of them were lightly injured, but a few people were seriously injured. It was very miserable. Of course, the matter was blown out of proportion. The deputy region master of the Joy Realm hurriedly called for their region master to calm the situation. The messenger guard ran to Ji Tianqing and reported what had happened. Ji Tianqing was furious when he heard this. He angrily reprimanded the people of the Joy Realm for being presumptuous and lawless. His subordinates were still on duty, but the other party dared to attack them. They had gone too far. He immediately asked the messenger guard to report to the region master of the Xin and region. He also contacted a few region masters who were on good terms with him to support them. After a while, the region master of the Xin and region ran to Ji Tianqing and angrily asked him what had happened. Ji Tianqing's anger hadn't subsided yet, so he described the actions of those people from the realm of happiness to Nye Tian with exaggerated details. Although the region master of the Xin and region felt that something was wrong, he didn't think too much about it because they had a common enemy. When he learned that Ji Tianqing had contacted a few other region masters to support them and reason with the other party, the region master of the Xin and region agreed wholeheartedly. Moreover, he advised earnestly, "We are going to launch our counterattack soon. Now is a crucial moment. We must not cause any trouble. I know that you are regretful and angry that the three divine generals did not choose us when they led their troops to battle. However, you did not show any emotion and could still remain calm. Let the other four region masters be the judge. Then, I can rest assured." Ji Tianqing quickly said, "That's right. We are an elite army. We have sacrificed our lives for the Celestial King. How loyal are we to the Celestial King? How can we let those bastards from the Joy Realm bully us? This is absolutely intolerable. However, I will not have a conflict with them. I will only let the other region masters be the judge. If we can't explain it clearly, we will ask Divine King Fengyi to be the judge." The region master of the Xin and region quickly waved his hand and persuaded, "Don't. It's best if we can settle this privately. Don't disturb Divine King Fengyi." Ji Tianqing nodded to show that he understood. The region master of the Xin and region was still a little worried. He decided to go to the scene personally. Ji Tianqing followed him. However, a mocking sneer flashed across his eyes. The two of them left the courtyard they lived in. They had only flown 1,000 miles when the messenger guard rushed towards them with a flustered look on his face. The region master of the Xin and region's heart skipped a beat. He had a premonition that the situation was not good. He quickly stopped the guard and asked, "Why are you so flustered?" With a sullen face, the messenger guard replied with an embarrassed expression, "Domain Lord, the other four domain lords have brought their men here to judge and uphold justice for us, but we didn't expect the bastards from the Joy Domain to be so unforgiving. They slandered us and insisted that we bullied them with numbers. The other commanders were furious and started fighting with them again. The four domain lords were also affected, and everyone was swept up in it. So, the five of us joined forces and defeated all the people from the Joy Realm." You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.